He slammed his fist so hard the coffee mugs shattered on the floor. Then he pointed straight at her face and shouted the kind of shout that had made grown men beg. Maya Bennett didn't beg. She picked up the steaming coffee pot, looked him dead in the eyes, and said it quietly, clearly, without 1 second of hesitation. "Shout at me again, and I'll end you before your man takes 2 steps." Vincent Moretti, feared by everyone in Baltimore, stared at this broke, exhausted waitress in a stained uniform. His bodyguard reached for his weapon. Vincent raised his hand, stopped him. Then he did something nobody in that room expected. He smiled and came back the next night, alone. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because this story is going to take you places you did not expect. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story traveled. Now let's go back to that diner, because what happened next changed everything. It was 3:17 in the morning. Baltimore was in the middle of the kind of rainstorm that made you question why anyone chose to live on the East Coast. The wind was coming sideways, driving rain against every window like gravel, thrown by an angry hand. The streets were almost empty, just the occasional set of headlights cutting through the dark and the hollow sound of water rushing along the gutters. Inside Harbor Light Diner, the fluorescent light above the third booth had been flickering for 6 weeks. Nobody had fixed it. The coffee machine sputtered when it ran low on water, which it always did around this hour, and the booth cushions near the window had been patched so many times with electrical tape that you could barely see the original vinyl underneath. Maya Bennett had been on her feet since 7 o'clock the previous morning, 20 hours. She had worked the lunch rush, covered for a coworker who called out sick, and then pushed straight through the dinner service and into the overnight shift because she needed the hours. Her lower back had stopped hurting around midnight, which was not a good sign. It meant her body had simply given up protesting and moved into a kind of numb autopilot. She was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door let out its familiar clang. Maya did not look up right away. At this hour, the customers who came through that door were predictable. Cab drivers who wanted black coffee and a place to sit. Night shift nurses from the hospital 4 blocks away. Occasionally someone who had been out too late and needed something in their stomach before they tried to drive home. She knew how to read them all within 30 seconds of them walking in. So she finished wiping the section of counter she was on, set down her cloth, and then looked toward the door. 2 men. The first one through the door was big, not the kind of big that came from vanity or a gym membership, but the kind that suggested a lifetime of physical work and deliberate intimidation. He moved ahead of the second man, and his eyes swept the diner with a quick, professional efficiency that Maya recognized instinctively as the kind of look a person develops when they have spent years scanning rooms for threat. He clocked the 4 remaining customers, a trucker in the far booth, an elderly man at the counter, 2 nurses sharing a plate of fries near the window, and then he stepped aside to let the second man enter. The second man was the one who commanded attention. He was not as physically imposing as the first. He was maybe 6 feet tall, lean through the shoulders, with a kind of posture that came not from confidence, but from years of being the person everyone else in the room watched. His coat was expensive, the kind of dark wool that cost more than Maya made in a month, and it was soaked through. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead from the rain, and he was bleeding. Not dramatically, not the way they show it in movies where someone staggers in and collapses. It was a controlled wound, the kind a person was managing through sheer will. His left hand was pressed against his side, beneath the coat, and when he moved toward the counter, his jaw was tight in a way that told Maya he was absorbing serious pain and refusing to let it show. She watched him cross the diner. He moved past the trucker's booth without looking at him, past the elderly man at the counter without acknowledging his existence. He chose the stool at the far end of the counter, the one closest to the wall, where a person could sit with their back protected and their eyes on the door. He sat down heavily, and for just fractions of a second, the control slipped. She caught the way his breath came out through his teeth, sharp and involuntary, before he pulled himself back together. His man, the large one, positioned himself near the door, not sitting, standing, watching everything and everyone. Maya picked up her order pad out of habit and walked to the end of the counter. "Coffee?" she asked. The man at the stool did not answer immediately. He was looking at her in that way some men had not looking at her the way men did when they were interested, but assessing her, categorizing her, filing her away under whatever mental system he used to sort the people around him into useful and irrelevant. "Coffee," he said, "and whatever you use for a first aid kit." Maya looked at him for a moment. You want me to call someone? No. The hospital is 4 blocks east. I said no. His voice dropped half a degree, and the word landed with a kind of weight that had clearly ended conversations many times before. Maya looked at him for one more second. Then she turned, poured the coffee, and went to the back to get the first aid kit they kept in the supply closet, the decent one, not the cardboard box with 3 Band-Aids and an expired antiseptic wipe that some diners kept for show. When she came back, she set the kit on the counter beside the coffee. She did not offer to help. She did not ask again. She simply placed it there and moved back 2 steps, which was her way of saying, your situation, your choice. The man looked at the kit. Then he looked at the coffee. Then he picked up the mug and drank half of it in one long pull, and some of the tension around his eyes relaxed by a fraction. He reached into the first aid kit with his right hand. His left hand, the one pressed against his side, did not move. Maya watched him struggle with the packaging on the gauze for a moment. He was managing it, but barely, because the angle was wrong, and whatever was under his hand was making it difficult to use both hands without causing himself more pain. She said nothing. He got the gauze out. He tried to reach across his own body and failed. His jaw tightened again. He set the gauze on the counter and took another breath. I don't need help, he said without looking at her. I didn't offer any, Maya replied. He looked up then. Actually looked at her. Not through her or past her, but at her. Something shifted in his expression, not much, but enough. Can you do it without making it a whole thing, he asked. I've been cleaning up messes in this diner since 11 last night, Maya said. I'm not dramatic about much anymore. She came around the end of the counter. She put on a pair of gloves from the kit. She looked at his hand, still pressed against his side. You need to move that, she said. He hesitated for just a moment, the kind of hesitation that was not about pain but about the act of showing someone vulnerability, and then he moved his hand. It was a knife wound, deep enough to need real attention, not so deep that she was looking at something that would kill him in the next few minutes. She had grown up in a neighborhood where she'd seen worse, and the knowledge that came from that upbringing was not something she had ever wanted to use, but it was there when she needed it. She worked quickly and without conversation. She cleaned it, pressed fresh gauze against it, and used the medical tape to hold it in position with firm, even pressure. The man sat completely still the entire time. He did not make a sound. When she was done, she stripped off the gloves and walked back around the counter. You'll need stitches, she said. That tape will hold if you don't move around like an idiot for the next few hours, but it's not a permanent solution. I know. She topped off his coffee without being asked. For a moment, the diner was quiet. The old man at the counter paid his bill and left without looking in their direction. The trucker was asleep in his booth. The nurses were talking quietly near the window, pointedly not paying attention to the 2 new arrivals. Then the man at the stool did something that shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. He slammed his open palm down on the counter, not quite a fist, but close, and the impact was loud enough that every mug in range rattled. The nurses stopped talking. The trucker's eyes opened. The large man near the door straightened up. This coffee is cold, the man said. His voice was not loud, but it had the quality of a thing that was about to become loud. I don't drink cold coffee. And you, he pointed at Maya, don't make me ask twice. Everything in the room contracted. The large man near the door took a step forward, and his right hand moved toward the inside of his coat. Maya looked at the man on the stool. She looked at his pointing finger. She looked at the coffee mug in front of him, which she had refilled less than 4 minutes ago, and which was visibly steaming. Then she picked up the glass coffee pot from the warmer behind the counter. She held it up so he could see it clearly. She set it down in front of him with a firm, deliberate sound. Shout at me again, Maya said, and I'll end you before your man takes 2 steps. Her voice was completely level, not angry, not shaking, not performing bravery for anyone in the room. She said it the way a person states a fact they have already considered from every angle and decided is simply true. The room did not breathe. The large man had his hand halfway inside his coat. The man on the stool looked at Maya, and then he did something that nobody in that room expected. He opened his mouth and he laughed. Not a sharp, dangerous laugh, not the kind that preceded something terrible. A genuine one. Brief, surprised, like it had escaped him before he could decide whether to allow it. He lifted one hand toward the door without looking away from Maya. Grant, he said, enough. The large man Grant stopped. His hand came out of his coat empty. He stepped back to his position by the door, but his eyes stayed on Maya with an expression that was no longer threatening. It was something closer to confusion. The man on the stool straightened up on his stool. He looked at Maya the way you look at something you have not seen before and are still trying to classify. You know who I am, he asked. No, Maya said. And it wouldn't change anything if you did? Maya looked at him. My shift ends in 40 minutes. I still have 4 tables to close out and a floor to sweep. Whatever you are outside that door is not my problem in here. She paused. The coffee is not cold, by the way. It's fresh. You can see the steam. He looked down at the mug. He looked back up at her. What's your name? Vincent, he said. He did not offer a last name, but something in the way he said, the first one suggested it was usually enough. She nodded once, nodded at any customer whose order she had taken note of, and she went back to wiping down the far end of the counter. For the next 20 minutes, Vincent Moretti sat on that stool and drank 2 cups of coffee and ate a plate of toast that Maya put in front of him without being asked, because she had noticed that he was running on empty and that wounded people needed something in their bodies before the adrenaline wore off and left them shaking. He did not thank her for the toast. She did not expect him to. When Grant finally came to his boss's side and said quietly, "We need to move," Vincent stood up carefully. He put on his coat. He reached into his interior pocket and pulled out a folded stack of bills without counting them, and he placed them on the counter beneath the empty coffee mug. Maya looked at the money. She did not touch it. "That's $500, Vincent said. "I can see that. The coffee, the bandage, the inconvenience." Maya looked at him steadily. "The coffee is $4. The bandage materials were maybe $3. The inconvenience, I'll let go this one time." She reached under the counter and pulled out a check she had already written up. She slid it toward him. "That's what you owe." He looked at the check. $7.40. Something moved across his face that was not quite amusement and not quite respect, but lived somewhere in the territory between the two. He picked up the check. He set the $500 back on the counter. Then he put the check on top of the stack of bills. "Keep the change," he said, "and make sure the coffee is fresh tomorrow." Maya looked at the money. Then she looked at the door that Vincent Moretti walked out of. Grant a half step behind him, both of them disappearing into the rain that was still hammering the Baltimore streets with the particular indifference that weather has for human drama. She stood at the counter for a moment. She had worked in service her entire adult life. She had been screamed at by customers who felt entitled to her patience, her dignity, and occasionally her silence, while they said things to her that they would never say to a person they thought of as an equal. She had smiled through it. She had gritted her teeth through it. She had done the math in her head. If I fight back, I lose this tip. If I lose this tip, I cannot cover the electric bill. And she had made the calculation that kept her employed and kept the lights on and kept her moving forward through a life that had demanded enormous amounts from her and delivered very little in return. But tonight she had picked up a coffee pot and she had spoken the truth. And the man on the other end of it had laughed instead of responding with violence. And she genuinely did not know what to make of that. She picked up the stack of bills. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she put them in her apron pocket, because whatever Vincent Moretti was or was not, she had earned every dollar of that money tonight, and she was not going to let pride convince her otherwise. She went back to closing out her tables. She swept the floor. She turned off the lights in the back at 4:02 a.m. and walked home through the rain with her collar up and her shoulders hunched and her mind running through the same loop of numbers. It always ran through rent, medical bills, utilities, the minimum payment she could make on the credit card, and still have enough left for groceries. And she told herself that whatever had happened tonight was simply an unusual night and that tomorrow would go back to being the ordinary, particular kind of difficult that her life had always been. She was wrong. The next night at 2:15 in the morning, the bell above the harbor light door rang again. Maya was refilling a cab driver's coffee when she heard it. She did not look up immediately, the way she never looked up immediately, because the habit of managing multiple things at once was so deeply embedded in her by now that it happened below the level of conscious thought. She finished with the cab driver. She set the pot back on the warmer. She looked toward the door. Vincent Moretti was standing inside the entrance, alone this time, no Grant and no coat soaked through with rain. Tonight he had on a different coat, dry, and he had clearly had his wounds seen to because he was moving without the careful, controlled stillness of a man absorbing serious pain. He walked to the end of the counter. He sat on the same stool. Maya came over. She looked at him for a moment. "Just coffee?" she said. "Just coffee," he said. She poured it. She went back to her other customers. He sat there for an hour. He did not make calls on his phone. He did not conduct business. He did not talk. He drank 2 cups of coffee, and when he left, he put exact change on the counter, $8, because it had been 2 cups at $4 each, and he walked back out into the night without a word. Maya picked up the $8 and thought, that is the strangest thing that has happened to me this week. And this has been an extremely strange week. She expected it to be a one-time thing. A man like that had places to be and people to manage, an entire world that had nothing to do with a 24-hour diner on the working waterfront side of Baltimore. He came back the following night, and the night after that. By the end of the first week, she realized this was not random. It was on the 5th night that he spoke more than 2 sentences to her. She was restocking the napkin holders at the end of the counter nearest his stool, and he was watching her work. And she had gotten accustomed enough to his presence that she did not find the silence uncomfortable, which in itself was unusual, because Vincent Moretti had a quality about him that most people found deeply uncomfortable, a stillness that had edges to it. You work every night, he said. 5 nights a week, she said, without looking up. 6 when I need the money, which is how often? Lately, 6. He was quiet for a moment. How long have you worked here? 4 years. You always work the overnight shift? The overnight pays better. She finished with the napkins and moved to the next holder. Tips are worse, but the hourly difference makes up for it. Usually, he watched her work. You don't find it lonely? She looked at him. Do you find it lonely, she said. Sitting in a diner alone at 2 in the morning? He did not answer immediately. When he did, it was direct in a way she had not expected. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the napkin holders. Well, she said, then I guess we both made the same decision about where to be tonight. That was the beginning of the conversation that changed things. By the end of the 2nd week, he was paying her $500 a night to sit at the end of her counter during the slowest hour of her shift. And he made it clear that the money was not for her company, which he was careful never to demand, but for, as he put it, the hour itself, the fact that the diner was open, the fact that someone was present who did not need anything from him. Maya refused. Not the arrangement, she understood what he was describing, but the framing of it. She told him directly, I am not your employee. I am not your therapist. I am not a service you are purchasing. If you want to sit here and drink coffee, you sit here and drink coffee. You tip me what the coffee is worth, and you leave the rest of it in your coat pocket. He looked at her with an expression that suggested this was not a response he received often. Then what is this, he asked. This, Maya said, is a diner, and you are a customer. And I am the person who makes sure you have coffee and something to eat and enough space to sit quietly if that's what you need. That's the arrangement. He was quiet, but she said, I have rules. No weapons where I can see them. No business done in here, no meetings. No calls that end with someone getting hurt. No shouting at me or anyone else who works here. And if any of those things happen, you find somewhere else to be. She watched him absorb this. Most people don't give me conditions, he said. Most people, Maya replied, are afraid of you. He looked at her steadily. And you're not. She thought about it for a moment, because she wanted to be honest. I'm not afraid, she said. I just have a lot of things I'm afraid of, and you've landed somewhere in the middle of the list. My landlord threatening eviction is up near the top. Medical debt is number 1. She tilted her head, you're manageable. For the 2nd time in her memory, Vincent Moretti laughed. Not the brief, surprised escape of that first night. A real one, slower and quieter and genuine. Fine, he said. Your rules. And so it began. The strange, improbable arrangement that Maya had not sought and could not entirely explain. The crime boss who came to her counter every night and sat in the quiet like a man who had not had access to quiet in years. She learned things about him in the way you learn things about people you see regularly, without trying to, through accumulation, through small moments, through the things that slip out when a person's guard has come down far enough that they say something true before they can decide whether to say it. She learned that he had inherited his position, not chosen it, that his father had built the organization, and that Vincent had stepped into it at 26, because the alternative was watching everything collapse and leaving the people who depended on it with nothing. She did not know if that made him more sympathetic or simply more complicated, and she told herself it was not her job to decide. She learned that he had spent 13 years surrounded by people who either wanted something from him or were afraid of him, and that he had forgotten what it felt like to have a conversation that was simply a conversation. She learned that he was trying to move his company Moretti Maritime into legitimate business, shipping, construction, hospitality, and that the men around him who had grown comfortable with the old ways were not happy about it. He did not tell her these things in long explanations. They came out in fragments. A comment here, a question there. The way he talked about the people in his organization, with a flatness that was not cruelty but exhaustion. And she told him things too, which surprised her more than anything he told her. She told him about her mother, the illness that had come on fast and cost everything they had, and then cost more than that. The way she had left college during her second year because there was nobody else to manage the appointments and the insurance calls and the impossible bureaucracy of being sick in America without money. She had been majoring in hospitality management. She had had a plan. And then the plan had been overtaken by reality, the way plans often are, and she had made her peace with it, mostly. "Do you regret it?" he asked one night. She considered the question carefully because she did not believe in answering questions about serious things carelessly. "No," she said finally. "I would make the same choice. I would have hated the version of myself that made the other one." She paused. "But I'm allowed to also think it was unfair." "Yes," he said. "You are." He said it simply, without trying to solve it or minimize it or redirect it into something more comfortable, and she noticed that because most people could not simply agree that something was unfair without immediately trying to explain why it was actually fine. On the night that she realized things between them had shifted into something she did not have a clean category for, a man at table 6 grabbed her wrist. He was not a regular customer. He was drunk and unhappy about something she had said she had told him. The kitchen was closed for hot food and that she could only offer him what was already made, and his unhappiness had translated, the way some men's unhappiness did, into his hand closing around her wrist and squeezing. "You're going to get me what I want," he said, "or I'm going to make this difficult for you." Maya had handled situations like this before. It was not the first time a customer had grabbed her. It was not the 5th time. She knew how to de-escalate, how to create distance, how to handle her own rescue without making a scene that would cost her the shift. But before she could execute any of that, she heard the stool at the end of the counter scrape against the floor. Vincent was on his feet. He crossed the diner in 4 steps, and his presence arriving next to the table was like a change in air pressure, sudden and impossible to ignore. He did not say anything. He simply stood there. The drunk man looked up. His grip on Maya's wrist loosened immediately, and Maya, who could feel the nature of what was about to happen and who had spent her entire adult life paying for the consequences of other people's choices, said clearly, "Vincent, no." He looked at her. "I've got this," she said. And then she turned back to the customer and removed her wrist from his hand with a firm, deliberate motion and said, "I'm going to need you to settle your bill and leave now. I'll bring you the check." He did not argue. The presence of a man like Vincent Moretti, even standing still and saying nothing, had communicated something that did not need words. When he was gone and the door had swung shut behind him, Vincent turned to Maya. He was still carrying the tension of what he had been about to do. "Why did you stop me?" he said. Maya looked at him. "Because," she said, "protecting me doesn't mean owning my choices." He stood there looking at her, and she watched him turn that sentence over. She watched it land, somewhere important, somewhere it had not found before, and she watched it change something in the quality of the stillness he carried. He went back to his stool. He sat down, he picked up his coffee. He held it in both hands without drinking it, and he looked at the counter. And she had the sense that he was doing the kind of thinking that a person does when they realize something they cannot unthink. After a while, he said, "I've never thought of it that way." "I know," Maya said. She poured him fresh coffee and went back to closing out her tables. The fluorescent light above the 3rd booth was still flickering. Nobody had fixed it. But tonight it seemed less like a symbol of everything that was always broken, and more like simply a light that needed a new bulb. She would put in the request tomorrow. She put it in. And 3 days later, she found out the heater in the back had been repaired. A repair the building manager had been dodging for 8 months. Nobody signed the work order. The repair company would only say that someone had paid in advance and asked them to come before the staff arrived in the morning. Maya stood in the back and felt the first real warmth from those vents in almost a year. She did not ask Vincent about it. She was certain it was him. And she was also certain that if she thanked him, it would become something he felt entitled to continue, and she needed the line between them to stay clear. But she noticed, and he knew she noticed, and somehow that was enough. The nights continued. The conversations deepened. She challenged him when he made arguments that dressed up exploitation as simply the way business worked. She told him that calling something a system did not make it right. He pushed back. She pushed harder. He went quiet, not the way people went quiet when they had nothing to say, but the way people went quiet when they were genuinely processing something. One night he said, "You would have been good at this. Running something, you see things." Maya looked at him. "I am good at it. I run this counter every night and I manage people, and I solve problems, and I remember every regular customer's order without writing it down. The difference between me and the people you bring into your meetings is that nobody put me at the right table." He nodded slowly. "That's the part I'm trying to change." She looked at him for a moment. "In your organization?" She held his gaze. "Then change it," she said. "Not because it's good for business, because it's the right thing to do." He did not have a quick answer for that. He sat with it the way he had been learning to sit with things. And when he left that night, he put exact change on the counter, 2 cups of coffee, $8. And he paused at the door and said, without turning around, "Thank you for the rules." Maya looked at the money. She thought about a man who had walked in bleeding and furious and had somehow ended up learning what it felt like to be in a room with someone who treated him like he was capable of being better. She thought about what that said about how little of that he had been given, and what it said about her, that she had given it without meaning to. She went back to wiping down the counter. The rain had stopped outside. For the first time in a long time, the diner felt like somewhere worth being. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Maya started keeping a second coffee mug, warmed at the end of the counter at 2:10 every morning. She told herself it was efficiency. She was already making a fresh pot at that hour anyway, and it made no sense to let the first cup sit and cool before he arrived. It was not sentiment. It was logistics. She believed that for about 4 days before she stopped trying to convince herself. Vincent noticed the mug on the 3rd night it was there. He sat down, looked at it, looked at her, and said nothing. He picked it up and drank, and Maya went back to whatever she had been doing, and neither of them commented on it, because they had developed a shared language around the things that did not need to be spoken aloud, and that mug had become part of it. What Maya had not anticipated when this all started was how much she would come to understand about the mechanics of a world she had always existed on the edge of without ever being inside it. Not because Vincent lectured her or explained himself or tried to draw her into his business. He was deliberate at those things separate, and she respected the line because she had drawn it herself. But because he was a man under pressure, and pressure had a way of making things surface that a person spent years keeping submerged. It started with small comments, offhand observations about meetings that had gone wrong, references to people in his organization whose names she began to recognize through repetition: Marcus, who handled the East Side logistics and who Vincent trusted but watched carefully; Elena, his company attorney, who he described as the sharpest person in any room she entered, and the only person he had never caught lying to him; and Raymond. Raymond Vale came up differently than the others. With Marcus, Vincent spoke with something approaching fondness. With Elena, he spoke with genuine respect. But when Raymond's name appeared in conversation, there was a quality to the silence that came before it, a slight flattening of Vincent's expression, a pause that was a fraction too long that told Maya the relationship was complicated in ways that had not yet fully surfaced. "He's been with the organization since my father's time," Vincent said one night, about 4 weeks in. He was not speaking to her. Specifically, he had the quality some people had of thinking aloud when they were comfortable enough to stop editing themselves in real time. "He knows everything, every operation, every relationship, every deal that was ever made. When my father died and everything came to me, Raymond was the one who made the transition possible. There would have been chaos without him." Maya refilled his coffee. "But," she said. He looked at her. "There's a but in there somewhere," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He thought he would have more authority in the new structure. "The way I'm reorganizing things, moving toward legitimate operations, it changes what his knowledge is worth. The things he knows how to do don't translate cleanly into a legal shipping company. And he's not handling that well. He's handling it the way everyone in that world handles things they don't like," Vincent said, quietly. "And I can't tell yet how quietly." Maya set the pot back on the warmer. She looked at him. "You think he's working against you?" Vincent did not answer that directly. He picked up his coffee. He looked at it. "I think," he said carefully, "that Raymond Vale has spent 30 years learning how to be indispensable to a Moretti. And I think he is not ready to learn how to be something else." She noted it, she filed it away, and she went back to her counter. What she did not say to him, because she was still working out how to say it, was that the way he described Raymond was the way people described someone they already knew was a problem, but had not yet allowed themselves to act on. It was the particular blindness that came from loyalty, the way trust, once built, could make a person ignore evidence that was sitting directly in front of them. She had seen it before. Not in a crime organization, but in her mother's hospital situation, where a doctor they had trusted for years had been consistently wrong, and they had kept defending him because the alternative, admitting they had misplaced their faith, felt worse than continuing to believe. She thought about saying this to Vincent. She decided to wait until she understood the situation better. She did not have to wait long. It was a Tuesday night, 5 weeks in, when Vincent came through the door at 2:15 and sat down and did not reach for his coffee right away. He sat with his hands flat on the counter and looked at something in the middle distance that had nothing to do with the diner. Maya poured the coffee and left it next to his hands without comment. She went to check on her other customers. When she came back, the mug had not moved. "Something happened today," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. She waited. "I found a discrepancy in the financials for the Maritime Division," he said. "A vendor account that doesn't correspond to any actual contract I've authorized. The payments go back 8 months. Maya absorbed this. How much? He told her the number. She absorbed that too. It was not a small number. "Who has access to those accounts?" she said. He looked at her, and she could see in his face the answer he did not want to say. "Raymond," she said. "Raymond has access to everything," Vincent said. "He's always had access to everything. That was the deal. My father gave him access because trust was the currency. You don't give someone 30 years and then put locks on the doors." "Except," Maya said, "someone is using the access." Vincent picked up his coffee. He drank it in 2 long pulls and set the mug down. "Elena is looking into it. Quietly. She doesn't know who to be suspicious of yet. But you do." He did not answer. Maya leaned against the counter. She looked at him directly. "Vincent, you know, knowing and proving are different things," he said. "And accusing Raymond Vale of stealing from me, if I'm wrong, it destroys a 30-year relationship and fractures every alliance he's part of. If I'm right?" He stopped. "If you're right," Maya said, "then someone who knows everything about you and your organization has decided to move against you." He nodded. "Once. Then you need to move faster than he does," she said. He looked at her. For a moment, the exhaustion in his face was completely unguarded, the exhaustion of a man who had been managing other people's loyalty for so long that he had forgotten what it cost him. "I know," he said. "I just needed to say it to someone who wasn't already playing a side." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the coffee pot and refilled his mug. Because whatever else was true, he needed to be warm and caffeinated when he was about to navigate something that could go very wrong. "Eat something," she said. She put in an order for toast and eggs without asking him. "You can't think clearly when you're running on coffee, and whatever that is you're feeling." He looked at the order slip she clipped to the line. "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask if you were hungry," she said. "I said eat." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He ate the eggs when they arrived, and when he was done, his hands on the counter were steadier than they had been when he sat down. She noticed. She did not say anything about it. But Raymond Vale's name had taken on a different weight in her mind after that conversation. She began paying attention to the fragments Vincent let slip, without pressing him, letting them accumulate the way she accumulated information about her regular customers slowly by observation, without demands. Raymond was 54 years old and had been in the Moretti organization since Vincent was a child. He had survived 3 internal crises, 2 federal investigations that had gotten close but not close enough, and the transition of power after Vincent's father died. He was good at surviving. He was particularly good at making himself necessary to whoever held authority, which was a skill that required a very specific and very cold kind of intelligence. He also, Vincent mentioned once without emphasis, had a private investment company that Vincent had never looked too closely at because Raymond had presented it as a personal project, separate from Moretti business. Maya heard that and set it aside. She did not ask questions. She waited. 3 nights later, Vincent came in and sat down and said, without preamble, "Elena found another account. Same structure, different vendor name, same private routing numbers underneath." Maya looked at him. "How many do you think there are?" "We don't know yet. She's still pulling threads." He paused. "The routing numbers trace back to a holding company registered in Delaware. We don't have the name of the beneficial owner yet, but the structure..." He stopped himself, as if he had started to say something he had not fully decided to say. "The structure matches Raymond's private company," Maya said. He looked at her. "You mentioned it once," she said. 3 weeks ago. You said he had a private investment company and that you had never looked too closely at it." The way he looked at her in that moment, not with surprise exactly, but with a recalibration, the way a person recalibrates when they realize the person they are talking to has been listening more carefully than they accounted for, was something Maya would remember for a long time. "You remember everything," he said. "I remember everything," she confirmed. "It's useful in this job." He looked at the counter. "If it's Raymond's company receiving the payments, then he's been stealing from you for at least 8 months, Maya said. Maybe longer. And the question is not just what he's taking. The question is what he's planning to do with it." Vincent was quiet. "A man like Raymond doesn't steal for spending money," Maya said. "He steals to build something." "What does he need money for that he couldn't have asked you for directly?" Vincent sat with that question. She watched him work through it, and she could see the moment when something clicked into place, the moment when the pieces he had been looking at separately arranged themselves into a shape he recognized. "He's buying loyalty," Vincent said. "My father's old lieutenants, the ones who haven't committed to the new direction. Raymond's been getting closer to them over the past 6 months. I thought it was nostalgia. He's known these men for decades." His voice had gone quiet and very controlled, which she had learned meant he was feeling something he was not going to show. "He's buying their loyalty with my money." The diner was quiet around them. The cab driver in the far booth had fallen asleep. The clock above the counter read 3:04 a.m. "You need to be careful," Maya said. "If he already has allies and he knows you're looking into the accounts." "He'll know," Vincent said. "Elena's good, but there are people in the company who report to Raymond. If any of them notice what she's pulling, it gets back to him." He looked at his coffee. "I have maybe a week before he realizes I know." "Then use the week," Maya said. He looked at her. "What would you do?" he said. It was a genuine question, not rhetorical, not flattering, not the kind of question people ask when they have already decided the answer. He was asking because he wanted to know. Maya thought about it. "First, I'd figure out exactly what he's built. Not just the money, the structure. Who owes him what he's promised them. Because you can't dismantle something if you don't know the shape of it." She paused. "And I'd do it without letting him know you're looking. Because the moment he knows you're onto him, he stops being predictable. Right now, as long as he thinks you trust him, he's moving on a timeline," he said. "You can work around a timeline, you know." Vincent was looking at her with that expression she had come to recognize, the one where he was absorbing something and running it through some internal evaluation process that was separate from his immediate reaction. "You're describing intelligence work," he said. "I'm describing what you do when you're outnumbered. And you can't afford to make a mistake," Maya said. "I've been doing it my entire life. It's not specific to any one world." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Has anyone ever told you that you are wasted in this job?" Maya looked at him steadily. "Several times. And every single time, the person who said it had done absolutely nothing to help me be in a different one. So I stopped being flattered by it." Something in his face shifted. It was not guilt exactly. He was not a man who wore guilt on his face, but it was something adjacent. An acknowledgement of something uncomfortable. "Fair," he said. She went back to her counter. The next night, he brought papers with him. Not explicitly, they were folded inside a jacket pocket, and he did not take them out right away. But around 2:45, when the diner was at its quietest and her remaining customers were absorbed in their own worlds, he took them out and spread them on the counter in front of him. He did not ask her to look at them. He did not explain what they were. He just spread them out and continued drinking his coffee. Maya refilled his mug. She glanced at the papers. She kept moving, but she came back. She looked at the columns of numbers, the vendor names, the dates. She had studied restaurant management for almost 2 years, and in that time she had taken 3 accounting courses because the professor had told her class on the first day that the restaurants that failed always failed the same way, not from bad food or bad location, but from owners who did not understand their own numbers. She had taken those courses seriously in a way she had taken almost everything seriously, because she could not afford the luxury of doing things halfway. The documents in front of Vincent were not restaurant accounts, but numbers were numbers, and the patterns they made when they were being manipulated had a shape that was recognizable once you knew what it looked like. She looked at the vendor column. She looked at the date column. She looked at the payment amounts, and then she looked at the intervals between them. And something caught her eye, not a single thing, but a rhythm, a regularity that was too regular. Genuine vendor payments had variation in them, different amounts for different orders, different timing based on delivery schedules. These payments were too consistent. Same amounts, almost same dates each month, with variations that looked random. But if you looked at the pattern across 8 months, we're actually cycling through a small set of rotations. These amounts, she said. Vincent looked up. They rotate, she said. See, this amount appears in month 1, then again in month 4, then month 7. And this one follows it 2 weeks later each time. It's not random variation. It's a cycle designed to look like random variation. He looked at the papers. He looked at her. You can see that from looking at it. I studied accounts for 2 years, she said. I never got to use it. Until right now, apparently. He pulled the papers closer and looked at the pattern she was describing. She watched him trace it with his eyes, and she watched the moment when he saw it too, when the thing she had described resolved itself from noise into a signal he could not unsee. There are duplicate accounts hidden in here, she said. I guess there are more we're not seeing yet. But this cycling pattern, that's how you prove it's intentional. Any one of these payments could be explained as a legitimate variance. The cycle over time proves it's structured. Vincent sat back. He looked at the papers. He looked at the counter. He looked at nothing for a moment. Then he said, Raymond has been doing this for more than 8 months. It was not a question. It was a man arriving at a conclusion he had been resisting. I don't know yet. Maybe years. He paused. My father trusted him completely. Which means if Raymond was doing this before I took over, then the fraud may predate your leadership by a long time, Maya said. And he knows that. Which means he's not just protecting himself from you. He's protecting something he's been building for a very long time. The weight of that landed in the diner between them, like something physical. Maya picked up the coffee pot. She refilled his mug because it was empty, and because she needed something to do with her hands while she thought. Vincent, she said carefully, you said he's been getting closer to your father's old lieutenants? Yes. And you said he's been trying to position himself in the new structure, but that his skills don't translate. Right. So he's not just stealing, she said. He's building a parallel organization, using your assets to fund it. And the people he's recruiting with your money are the ones who are already unhappy with the direction you're taking things. Vincent looked at her. He's not trying to steal from you, Maya said. He's trying to take everything. The silence that followed that sentence was the kind of silence that had weight and temperature. Vincent's hands, which had been relaxed on the counter, were no longer relaxed. She could see the change in his jaw, the way his eyes went flat and very still, and she knew she was seeing the version of him that had made people afraid of him for a long time. I need to make a call, he said. Not from here, Maya said. You said yourself there are people who report to Raymond. Use a phone he doesn't know about. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out a phone she had not seen before, different from the one he usually carried, and left the counter to make the call, near the back of the diner, away from the windows. She went back to work. She wiped down the counter. She checked on her sleeping cab driver and confirmed he was just asleep and not something worse. She put in the order for the batch of muffins the morning rush would need, because her shift was almost over and the morning person deserved a running start. When Vincent came back, some of what she had seen in his face was still there, but overlaid now with the controlled purpose of a man who had decided what he was going to do. Elena is starting a full audit, he said. I'm bringing in an outside forensic accountant who Raymond has never met and whose name doesn't appear in any of our records. They start tomorrow. Maya nodded. I need to behave normally with Raymond until we have everything, he said. Meet with him. Include him in discussions, not let him know I know. He paused. That's going to take a kind of patience I am not naturally good at. I know, Maya said. He looked at her. How are you sure? Because, she said, you've been sitting on this stool every night for 5 weeks, and not once have you behaved like a man who's capable of the things I've heard whispered about you in this neighborhood. People can do things they're not naturally inclined to when the reason is big enough. He held her gaze for a moment. It was a moment that had more inside it than either of them was prepared to name yet, and they both knew it, and by silent mutual agreement, they let it go unnamed. He stood. He put on his coat. He put $8 on the counter. Same time tomorrow, he said. Coffee will be fresh, she said. He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. Maya stood at the counter and looked at the stack of papers he had left behind. Deliberately, she thought, though he had not said so, and she looked at the cycling payment patterns she had identified. And she thought about what it meant that a man who controlled a significant portion of Baltimore's waterfront operations came to her counter at 2 in the morning because it was the only place he could think clearly. She thought about what it meant that she was starting to understand why. She folded the papers. She folded the care suite and put them under the counter with the first aid kit because it felt like the right place, things that had been brought to her in crisis, that she had handled with steadiness, that now lived in her care until they were needed again. She went home at 4 a.m. She could not sleep for an hour because her mind was running through payment cycles and Dutch shell company structures and the particular arithmetic of loyalty purchased with stolen money. The next night, when Vincent came in, he sat down and said without preamble, "The auditors found 3 more cycling vendor accounts. 11 accounts total that we can confirm so far. The payments traced through Raymond's company and then forward into 6 holding accounts in 3 different states." Maya set his coffee in front of him. "What's the full amount?" he told her. She kept her face composed, but the number was large enough that it required composure. "He's been planning this for years," Vincent said. "This is not opportunism. This is a project." "Then it has an endpoint," Maya said. "He's building towards something specific. What does he need all of that for?" Vincent was quiet. Then he said, "To acquire Moretti Maritime outright. If he frames me for the financial crimes, uses the fraud itself as evidence that I'm the one responsible, he takes the company through a combination of legal process and the loyalty he's purchased. He gets the legitimate assets. He absorbs them into his own structure. And whatever he can't keep cleanly, he liquidates before anyone can stop him." Maya looked at him. "That would destroy the legitimate employees." "Yes. The people who took jobs with your company because you promised them a legal operation." "Yes," he said again, and his voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Not anger exactly, something that sat underneath anger and was older and more complicated. 340 legitimate employees. Moretti Maritime has been making progress. Real progress. The shipping division turned a clean profit last quarter. These are people with mortgages, with kids. He stopped himself. "Raymond doesn't care about that." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This has to stop before it gets to that point. That's what I'm working toward." "You can't just stop it quietly," she said. "If it's this large and this structured, stopping it quietly means it can be rebuilt. You need it exposed." He looked at her. "Not just to protect yourself," she said. "To protect them, all of them. The only thing that makes 340 people safe is if Raymond's entire structure is visible to people who can act on it." Vincent held her gaze. She could see him weighing something that was not purely tactical. She could see him in the territory of a decision that had moral weight to it, and she watched him decide to sit in that weight instead of moving around it. "You're right," he said. He almost smiled. "You're not gentle about being right." "Being gentle about being right costs time," she said. "And you don't have a lot of it." He picked up his coffee. He looked out the window at the Baltimore street, where the early morning quiet had settled over everything like a held breath. "I've been in this world my entire life," he said. "I grew up in it. I never thought I would have to dismantle it." "You didn't build it," Maya said. "You inherited it. There's a difference." "Not to the people it hurt," he said. She paused. She looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "Not to them. But there's still a difference between the person who built it and the person who has the courage to take it apart." She paused again. "The question is what you do with the difference." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the cab driver in the corner woke up and paid his bill and left, and the clock moved from 3:22 to 3:41, and Maya served 2 nurses who came in from the hospital and ate quickly and did not make eye contact with anyone because they were too tired to manage social niceties. Then Vincent said, "I'm going to cooperate with the federal investigators. When we have everything on Raymond, the full structure, the full amount, I'm going to bring it to them voluntarily. Not because I'm forced to, because it's the right thing." Maya looked at him. "That will cost me," he said. "The cooperation will require disclosures I haven't made before. Some of those disclosures will hurt the organization's reputation. Some of them will cost me personally." "Yes," she said. "Probably. And you think I should do it anyway." She looked at him steadily. "I think you already know you should. That's why you said it out loud." He held her gaze. And in that moment, the diner was very quiet, and the coffee was hot, and outside the window, Baltimore was doing what Baltimore always did at this hour, going about its business without ceremony, without asking anyone's permission, without pausing to make things easier. "Yeah," Vincent said. "I guess I do." He put his $8 on the counter. He stood up. He looked at her with an expression that had become one of the things she carried into the rest of her days, not romantic, not possessive, but genuine. The expression of a man who had found in an exhausted waitress at a midnight diner the first honest mirror he had looked into in years, and who was not entirely sure how to reckon with what it had shown him. "Maya," she looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the coffee." She nodded once. Go do the hard thing, she said. He walked out. She stood at the counter. She looked at the empty stool. She thought about 340 people with mortgages and kids and a company that had started to actually become something legitimate and worth having. She thought about a man who had walked into her diner, bleeding and demanding, and had sat at her counter for 5 weeks and learned, slowly and imperfectly, that there was a different way to be in the world. She went back to work. She had 4 hours left in her shift. There were still tables to close, a floor that needed to be swept, and the muffin batter that needed to be checked before she handed the kitchen over to the morning team. She did all of it. She was good at doing all of it. And somewhere across Baltimore, in an office she had never seen, in a world she had never been invited into, Raymond Vale was moving the pieces of a plan he had been building for years, certain that he was the smartest person in the game, certain that nobody around Vincent Moretti could see clearly enough to stop him. He had not accounted for the woman at the end of the counter. He was going to. Raymond Vale made his first move on a Wednesday. Maya knew it was Wednesday because she had just finished the weekly inventory count, the part of her job she liked least and did most carefully, because the numbers in that kitchen were the difference between Harbor Light staying open and Harbor Light becoming another empty storefront on the waterfront block. She had the clipboard in her hand and was walking back to the counter when the door opened at 11:47 p.m., which was early for the overnight crowd and early enough that she still had a half-full dining room of late dinner customers who had not yet cleared out. Two men walked in. She clocked them in the first 3 seconds. Not because they were physically threatening, though they were both large enough that they took up the doorway. Not because they were loud or aggressive, because they were neither. She clocked them because they did not look at the menu board. They did not look at the available tables. They did not do any of the things that people who were hungry did when they walked into a diner at midnight. They looked at her. And then they sat at the counter, not at the far end, where Vincent's stool was, but in the middle where they could see everything and be seen by everyone. And they waited. Maya put the clipboard under the counter. She picked up the coffee pot. She walked over. "Coffee?" she said. The one on the left was maybe 40. He had the kind of face that had been arranged by years of being in situations where being the most dangerous person present was a professional requirement. He smiled when she asked, and the smile was professional too. Not warm, not real, but competent. "Sure," he 2 cups. She poured. She set down the mugs. She was about to move away when he spoke again. "You're Maya," he said. She stopped. She did not show what that sentence did to her pulse. She turned back with the same expression she used on every customer. "I am," she said. "You need anything else?" "We just want to talk," he said. "That's all. Very simple conversation." "About what?" she said. "About your friend," he said. "Vincent Moretti." The dining room behind her had 6 customers in it. A young couple near the window. 2 older men sharing pie at the middle table. A woman alone in the corner booth who had been nursing tea for 40 minutes. A teenage boy waiting for takeout near the register. None of them were paying attention to the counter, but they were here, and they were real. And Maya was not going to let whatever was about to happen at this counter become something they witnessed or got caught inside. She looked at the 2 men with complete steadiness. "I don't know anyone by that name," she said. The man on the left kept the professional smile. "Sure you do. He comes in here every night. Sits right down there." He nodded toward the far end of the counter. "Has coffee, talks to you. Been doing it for what, 5, 6 weeks now?" "A lot of people come in here," Maya said. "I don't keep track of names. This one you'd remember," the man said. "He's the kind of person people remember." His partner, the one on the right, who had not spoken yet, and who had the particular stillness of someone who was waiting for a specific cue, shifted slightly on his stool. Maya noticed the shift. She registered it and moved on. "I've got other customers," she said. "You need food or just the coffee?" "Just the coffee," the man on the left said. "And your time?" 5 minutes. "My time isn't for sale," she said. "The coffee is $4. The smile flickered. "Not much, but enough." "Mr. Vale thought you might want to know that your friend is in some serious trouble. Financial trouble. The kind that tends to attract federal attention. Mr. Vale is concerned about people who might be seen as connected to that situation. Even people who are just serving him coffee." There it was. Maya looked at the man on the left for a steady 3 seconds. Her heart was moving faster than she wanted it to, but her hands were still and her face was still. And she had learned in 20 years of service work how to keep those things separate. "That sounds like something for lawyers to sort out," she said. "Not waitresses." "It could be," the man said, "or it could be very simple. Mr. Vale just wants to know Vincent's schedule. When he comes in, When he leaves. Whether he brings anyone with him. Whether he ever mentions where he's going after. He shrugged, like it was nothing. Like it was the most reasonable thing a person could ask. That's it. Very easy. And Mr. Vale is generous with people who help him. Maya looked at him. She looked at the counter. She looked at the coffee mugs she had just filled. Finish your coffee, she said. I'll bring your check. She turned and walked back down the counter. She kept her pace even, and her shoulders relaxed. She reached the far end, where the register was, and she bent down as if she were getting something from the cabinet beneath it, and she pressed the silent alarm that had been installed 3 years ago after a robbery. The sent a direct signal to a private security firm that the diner contracted with, the one that brought a response vehicle within 7 minutes. 7 minutes. She straightened up. She put a check face down on the counter in front of the two men. She went to the far table and asked the young couple if they wanted dessert, because they had finished their dinner, and she needed to keep them from leaving yet. She recommended the pie. She made it sound genuinely good, which was easy because it was. They ordered 2 slices. She went to the middle table and refilled the 2 older men's coffee and told them there was fresh apple pie if they wanted it, on the house, because she was about to retire a whole pan of it. They looked delighted. She went to the woman in the corner booth and asked if she wanted anything else, and she did more tea, and Maya spent 2 full minutes at the table discussing the kind of tea and whether there was honey and whether Maya had a recommendation. By the time she came back to the counter, 6 of her 7 customers were eating something, and the teenage boy at the register had received his takeout order and left. The man on the left was watching her with an expression that had moved past professional. You're stalling, he said. I'm working, Maya said. I told you my time isn't for sale. The coffee is $4 each. That's $8 total. You don't want to make an enemy of Raymond Vale, the man said, and the professional smile was completely gone now. I don't know anyone by that name either, Maya said. The man on the right stood up from his stool. He was taller standing than he had seemed sitting, and he moved toward the end of the counter with the slow deliberateness of someone making a point through proximity. Maya held her ground. She did not step back. You should think carefully, the man on the left said, about who you're protecting. Vincent Moretti is going to have very serious problems in the very near future. People who are close to him are going to have those problems too, unless they make smart choices right now. The check is on the counter, Maya said. $8. I'll take cash or card. The man on the left looked at her for a long moment. He looked at his partner. He looked back at Maya. Something in his assessment of her shifted, and whatever he was recalculating, she could see him reach the conclusion that this particular angle was not going to produce what Raymond Vale had sent him here to get. He put a 20 on the counter. Keep the change, he said, with the tone of a man who wanted the words to carry a threat they couldn't quite legally be called. Maya picked up the 20. She went to the register. She came back with $12 in change and set it next to his empty mug. Have a good night, she said. They left. The door swung shut. Maya stood at the counter for 3 seconds, breathing, just breathing. Then she went to the young couple and apologized for hovering and told them the pie was genuinely on the house tonight, and the young woman said that was the nicest thing anyone had done for her all week. And Maya smiled at her like she meant it, because she did. The security response vehicle arrived at 11:58 p.m. 2 men in plain clothes who she spoke to briefly in the back. She told them what had happened. They documented it. They asked if she wanted a patrol presence for the rest of the night. She said yes. They stayed in the parking lot at 12:14 She called the number Vincent had given her 3 weeks ago for situations that could not wait until 2:15. He answered on the second ring. 2 men, she said, sent by Raymond. They wanted your schedule. When you come in, when you leave, who you bring. I didn't tell them anything. Silence on the line for 2 seconds. Then, are you all right? I'm fine, she said. They were trying to be subtle about it. They weren't very good at subtle. Maya, I hit the alarm under the counter. I kept the customers inside long enough. Security is in the parking lot. Everything is handled. She paused. What I need you to understand is that Raymond knows this place. He knows what it is to you. And he sent people here, which means he's done calculating, and he started moving. Longer this time. I'm coming in, Vincent said. Don't, she said, not tonight. What he wants to see how you react. If you come in tonight, you show him that this place is a vulnerability. Right now he's guessing. Don't confirm it. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. She could hear him thinking on the other end. She could hear the war between the part of him that operated on instinct protect respond, move, and the part that had been learning over 5 weeks of 2A, and conversations to think before reacting. You're right, he said finally. Tomorrow night. Same time, she said. And Vincent, call Elena tonight. Whatever you have, whatever the auditors have found so far, she needs to know Raymond is moving. Already dialing, he said. He hung up. Maya stood in the back for a moment. Then she went out and refilled the older men's coffee and asked the young couple if they wanted more pie, and spent the next 2 hours being the best overnight waitress in Baltimore. Because the diner was her territory, and nobody who walked through that door, threatening her customers or her staff or the rhythm of the place she had spent 4 years building her life around, was going to change what she was in it. At 2:15, the stool at the end of the counter was empty. It stayed empty. Maya had known it would. She had told him not to come. But the empty stool had a quality to it that it had not had before Raymond's men walked through the door, and she sat with that quality during the slow hours between 3 and 5 and let herself feel it without trying to solve it. Raymond Vale had miscalculated. He had sent 2 men to intimidate a waitress into giving up our schedule, which meant he still thought of her the way most people in Vincent's world thought of her, as a peripheral element. Someone adjacent. Someone useful to exploit rather than someone who had to be accounted for. She was going to remember that. Vincent arrived the following night at exactly 2:15 with his coat on and his jaw set in the way she had learned to read as controlled urgency, the face of a man who had information that needed to be said and was working out the order of it. He sat, she poured, he spoke. Elena has everything, he said. The full structure. 11 vendor accounts, all cycling. Total amount is substantial enough that what Raymond is facing is not a civil matter, it's federal. Wire fraud, money laundering, and what Elena believes is a structured conspiracy to commit securities fraud through the maritime company's bonds. He paused. She also found evidence that he was planning to file false financial disclosures under my signature. Documents were already prepared. Maya looked at him. He was going to frame you. Yes. The plan, as Elena has reconstructed it, was to use the fraudulent disclosures to trigger a federal investigation into me personally, use the investigation to force a leadership change, and step into the resulting vacuum with enough capital funded by the stolen assets to acquire the company's legitimate holdings before anyone could unwind the structure. 340 employees, Maya said. 340 employees, he confirmed. He was going to absorb what he wanted and liquidate everything else. The shipping contracts, the new hospitality division, all of it gone. Maya was quiet for a moment. When does he think he's moving? We believe he's called an emergency leadership meeting, Vincent said. 2 of his recruited lieutenants have gone quiet in the past 48 hours, which is the tell. When Raymond moves, he goes silent first. Cuts communication to anyone who might warn me. Where? The old Moretti warehouse on the waterfront, Vincent said. My father used it for coordination meetings. Raymond knows every entrance, every exit, every security system. He helped build the original setup. Maya absorbed this. He's calling you to that meeting. Yes, tonight. He framed it as an emergency board discussion about the federal audit concerns. He apparently knows we started the audit, which means someone on the audit team is reporting to him. Or someone close to Elena, Maya said quietly. Vincent's expression shifted. That's what I'm worried about. How many people know the full picture right now? Elena, the external auditor, and Grant, he said. And you, she thought about that. What happens if you don't go to the meeting? He moves the timeline up and does it messier, Vincent said. More collateral damage. More people caught in it. And if you go? He looked at her. I walk into a building that Raymond controls, with allies he spent months buying, on a night when he believes he has enough to end this in his favor. He paused. Grant will be with me. But Grant can't cover everything in that building alone. Maya stood very still. She was looking at the counter and she was thinking, and the thing she was thinking was moving through her like electricity, not panic, which she was too practiced to let take hold, but the sharp, specific energy of a problem that had to be solved right now and whose solution was not obvious. What does Raymond want from you at that meeting? She said. A signature, Vincent said. Under the pressure of the manufactured crisis, he's me to sign emergency authority documents that would temporarily transfer control of the Maritime Division's financial accounts to a management committee, a committee he controls. Once I sign, he can execute the transfer of funds before anyone can stop it. By the time the fraud is fully documented, the money is gone and I'm the one whose name is on the documents. Maya thought about this. He needs you there personally. He needs your physical presence and your signature. Yes. Which means as long as you're in that building, the timeline is his. Right. But, she said slowly, he can't execute without the signature. And if the evidence reaches people who can act on it before he gets the signature, then his window closes, Vincent said. He was watching her. He was watching the way she was thinking through it. And she could see that he was not ahead of her, he was running parallel. Both of them working toward the same conclusion from different angles. The board members, Maya said. Your legitimate board members, not the ones Raymond recruited. The independent ones. 6 of them, Vincent said. And Elena's contact at the Federal Financial Crimes Unit. She has one. He's not in the investigation yet. She was waiting until the documentation was complete. It's complete enough, Maya said. It needs to be in their hands before you walk into that warehouse. She paused. And Raymond's own accountant. The one managing the books for his private company, do you know who that is? Vincent looked at her. How do you know about the accountant? Because every structure like this has one, she said. Someone who does the actual numbers. And that person either knows what they're part of or has been kept deliberately ignorant. Either way, they're the weakest link in his structure. Because if his own accountant gets the evidence first, they might not protect him, Vincent said. They might actively help dismantle him, Maya said. People who do legitimate accounting work don't always know when they've crossed into something criminal. When they find out, they tend to respond strongly. Self-preservation. Vincent was looking at her with an expression she had come to recognize as genuine, not the polished effect he used in the world he came from, but something underneath it. You would have been terrifying in a courtroom, he said. I would have been a restaurant owner, she said. Can you get me the accountant's name? He pulled out his phone. He sent a text. 4 minutes later, his phone buzzed. He showed her the screen. She looked at the name. Elena needs to reach him tonight, before the meeting. I'll call her, he said. And the board members need the full documentation package, everything the auditors have found before midnight. She looked at the clock above the counter. It was 2:53 a.m. That gives you not much time, he said. He was already standing Vincent. She said it in the way that made him stop. He turned. Grant. Is he solid? Completely. Then tell him that if anything happens to communication lines in that building, if phones stop working, if the building system goes down, he needs to get word out by any means available. Does the warehouse have an intercom system? Vincent thought. Yes, old one. My father put it in during a renovation in the 90s. It runs on a separate circuit from the main building system. Does Raymond know about it? Pause. I don't know. It hasn't been used in years. Find out if it still works, she said. And find out if there's a logistics office with an archived connection to the company's traffic camera system. He looked at her. Why? She met his gaze steadily. Because I need you to give me access to it before you go into that building. The silence between them had a particular quality. Not discomfort, they were past discomfort with each other. It was the quality of a moment where the full weight of what they were to each other was present in the room without either of them needing to name it. You're not coming in there, he said. It was not a command. It was not even a request. It was the voice of a man who was afraid of something he could not control. I know, she said. I'm not going anywhere near that building. But you need eyes and a connection to the outside that Raymond doesn't know about. I'm asking you to trust me with the access. He looked at her for a long time. If anything goes wrong, he started. Then I'm a waitress who looked at some camera feeds, she said. I'm not in the building. I'm not part of the organization. I'm nobody Raymond is accounted for. He held her gaze. She held as the clock above the counter moved. Okay, he said. He made 3 calls before he left the diner. Elena got the full documentation package and the accountant's name and instructions to move immediately. 2 of the independent board members were reached directly and told to expect secured documents within the hour. A 3rd was left a message with enough information to act on if the first 2 did not respond. Before he walked out, he handed Maya a card with a 12-digit login sequence and an IP address. The logistics office connects through the company's archive server, he said. Traffic cameras for the whole waterfront block, including the warehouse. The intercom runs through the same server if the port is still open. He paused. It probably hasn't been used since 2009. Probably still works, Maya said. She looked at the card. She looked at him. Be careful in there. He nodded. He walked out. The diner was almost empty at that hour. 1 cab driver, 1 nurse. Maya kept working. She cleaned. She stocked. She did everything she was supposed to do. Because the diner needed her to do it, and because the rhythm of work was the thing that kept her functional when what she wanted to do was stop and be afraid. At 4:20 a.m., she got the text from a number she did not recognize, but had been told to expect. It said only, building. 20 minutes, she went to the back office. She sat down at the computer the manager used for ordering. She typed in the login sequence. The server was old and it took 40 seconds to connect. And those 40 seconds were the longest 40 seconds of Maya's recent life. Then the screen resolved into a grid of camera feeds, 6 angles on the warehouse exterior, 2 interior lobbies, 1 loading bay. She could see Vincent's car in the lot. She could see Grant standing near the entrance, his posture carrying the particular stillness of a man who was managing a great deal of information and showing none of it. She watched the feed. At 4:31 a.m., 4 additional vehicles arrived in the warehouse lot. 12 men got out. Maya watched them and counted, and felt something cold and clear move through her chest, because 12 men was not a board meeting. 12 men was a perimeter. Raymond had not called a meeting. He had set a trap. She tried Vincent's phone. Nothing. The line was dead, not disconnected. Just dead, the way a signal died when it was being actively suppressed. She tried Grant's number. Same. The building's communications were being jammed. Her hands moved to the keyboard. She opened the server's port directory, the way Vincent had told her the intercom was accessible if the port was still open. She found the port number. She typed in the address. A cursor blinked at her. She typed test. For 11 seconds, nothing. Then the cursor moved. Signal active. She closed her eyes for half a second. Then she opened them and she started typing, because there was no time for anything except what needed to happen next. She sent the full evidence package, everything she had access to on the server. Elena had been compiling simultaneously to 3 email addresses. Vincent's corporate attorney, the federal financial crimes investigator Elena had identified, and the address of Moretti Maritime's lead independent board member. She attached a document she had been writing for the past 40 minutes in the notes application on the office computer. A plain language summary of the fraud structure, the cycling payment pattern, the shell company routing, and the specific documents that proved Raymond's private company was the recipient of the stolen funds. Then she opened the intercom port and she pressed the key that activated the warehouse system. She could hear the room. Not clearly, the audio was poor decades-old equipment running on a legacy circuit, but she could hear voices. She could hear Raymond's voice, which she had never heard before, but recognized immediately as the voice of a man who was performing confidence for an audience. She could hear other voices. She could not hear Vincent, which frightened her. She found Grant's frequency, a secondary channel that Vincent had told her existed, a private channel his father had installed for secure internal communication during exactly the kind of crisis that was happening right now. She pressed it and said, clearly and evenly, Grant, it's Maya. The evidence has been sent. Federal contact has the full package. Board members have been reached. Raymond's window is closing. Tell him, silence. Then Grant's voice, low and tight, copy. She heard movement on the feed. She watched the camera showing the main warehouse floor, and she saw Grant cross the room, and she saw him reach Vincent, who was standing in a cluster of men near the center of the space with Raymond on the opposite side of a long table. She watched Grant say something directly into Vincent's ear. She watched Vincent's posture change. It was subtle, the kind of change that only someone who had been watching a person closely for 6 weeks would catch. His shoulders dropped a fraction, not in defeat, in something that was the opposite of defeat. The release of a man who had been carrying the weight of not knowing whether his plan was working, and who had just received the confirmation that it was. Raymond was still talking. His voice was rising on the intercom feed. She could hear the cadence of a man building toward a demand, the structured escalation of someone who believed he was in control of the room. Maya pressed the intercom key again. She said clearly and directly, into the warehouse system, Raymond Vale. Your financial records have been transmitted in the last 4 minutes to the Federal Financial Crimes Division, Moretti Maritime's independent board, and the company's corporate attorney. Every account, every shell company, every payment cycle, every document prepared under Vincent Moretti's forged signature. Anyone in that room who continues to support you will be identified as a participant in the conspiracy. The federal response is already in motion. The audio feed went chaotic for a moment, voices overlapping, movement, the particular sound of a room full of people rapidly recalculating where they stood. Then it went quieter, one by one. She watched the camera feeds. She watched 3 of the 12 men who had arrived as Raymond's perimeter walk back to their vehicles. She watched 2 more follow. She watched a man she did not recognize approach Raymond and say something that made Raymond turn and look at the wall, not at the intercom, because he did not know it was live. but in the direction of the voice that had come through the system, with an expression that she could not fully read on the low-resolution feed, but that had the quality of a man whose architecture had just collapsed. She heard the warehouse doors open on the audio feed. She heard the particular sound of additional voices, arriving professional, coordinated, the organized efficiency of people who carried authority with them, Baltimore police, and someone else, federal by the sound of the language. Elena had moved fast. Maya sat in the back office of Harbor Light Diner, and she listened to Raymond Vale being told his rights in a warehouse on the Baltimore waterfront at 4:58 in the morning, and she was completely alone, and she was absolutely steady, and her hands on the keyboard were not shaking at all. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her. A text from a number she recognized. One word, done. She sat for a moment, then she heard the bell above the diner door ring, and she got up because there was a customer, and she was the only person here, and that was her job, and she was going to do it. She walked out of the back office and behind the counter, and she picked up the coffee pot, and when she looked up, Vincent Moretti was standing inside the entrance of Harbor Light Diner. His coat was on. He was not bleeding this time. Grant was not with him. He was alone, and he was looking at her from across the room with an expression that contained everything that had happened in the last several hours and everything that had happened in the 6 weeks before that and everything. Neither of them had yet found words sufficient to say. She held up the coffee pot. Same stool, she said. He walked to the end of the counter. He sat down. He put both hands flat on the surface, and for a moment he just sat there, breathing the way a person breathes when they have been pulling something very tightly for a very long time and have just been allowed to set it down. She poured the coffee. She set it in front of him. She went back to work. After a while, he said, "You announced it over the intercom." I did, to the entire room. To the entire room, including Raymond. Especially Raymond. He picked up the coffee. He held it in both hands and looked at it. "I had the opportunity," he said quietly, "when the room went sideways and Raymond lost his people. I had a clear moment. Grant was there. It would have been simple. Maya did not stop what she was doing. She was restocking the sugar packets at the far end. But you didn't," she said. "Why not?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I heard your voice," he said, on the intercom, before I could move. "And something you said a long time ago, something about choosing a different life in the moment you actually have the choice." He paused. I lowered my hands. Maya set down the sugar packets. She looked at him. "You want a different life," she said. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. She picked up the coffee pot and came back to his end of the counter and refilled his mug, even though it was barely half empty, because she needed something to do with the feeling that was moving through her chest right now, and refilling a coffee mug was the most honest thing she could think of. "Okay," she said. "Then we figure out what that looks like." He looked at her. His hands were still around the mug. Outside the window, Baltimore was moving from the dark side of the night into the first pale edges of morning, the sky doing the slow, indifferent thing it did every day regardless of what happened beneath it. "It's going to cost me everything," he said. "Probably most of it," she said. "Not everything." He looked at her for a long time. She met his gaze without flinching, the way she had met his gaze the very first night when he had pointed a finger at her across a counter and expected the world to rearrange itself around his anger. The world had not rearranged itself. She had not moved. And something in that, something in the specific, ordinary, absolute steadiness of a woman who had decided a long time ago that her dignity was non-negotiable, had done what 30 years of fear and loyalty and strategy had failed to do. $8, she said. 2 cups. He almost laughed. He reached into his coat. He put $8 on the counter, exact change the way he always did. She picked it up. The morning light was starting to come through the diner windows. A new shift was beginning. The morning after Raymond Vale's arrest, Baltimore woke up the way it always did, without ceremony, without pause, without any particular acknowledgement that the night before had contained something that mattered. The docks started moving at 6. The coffee shops opened at 6:30. The news cycle picked up the story somewhere around 8 when a federal spokesperson confirmed that a significant financial crimes arrest had been made in connection with a maritime company, and the details began filtering through the city in that particular way that news filtered through a city like Baltimore, half rumor, half fact, all of it moving faster than the official version. Maya heard about the news coverage from her coworker Denise, who came in for the morning shift at 7 and immediately held up her phone and said, "Is this connected to the men who were in here last night? The ones security sat outside for?" Maya looked at the screen. She looked at Denise. Probably not, she said. I'll tell you about it later. Right now, I need to get you caught up on the overnight, and then I need to go home and sleep. Denise, who had worked beside Maya for 3 years and had developed an extremely accurate internal calibration for when Maya was saying something true and when she was saying something manageable, looked at her for a moment and said, "You look like you haven't slept in 2 days." "One day," Maya said. "I'll be back tonight." She walked home. She did not sleep immediately because her mind was still running through everything the way it ran through things after a shift that had gone sideways, replaying, checking, looking for what she had missed or what could have gone differently. She lay on her bed and looked at the ceiling and went through it methodically until she had satisfied herself that every decision she had made had been the right one under the information she had at the time. Then she slept for 6 hours. She woke up at 2 in the afternoon to 4 missed calls, one from an unknown number, one from a number she recognized as Elena's, and 2 from Vincent. She called Elena back first because Elena was the person most likely to have information Maya needed, rather than information Maya would have to process emotionally before she could use it. Elena answered on the first ring. Her voice had the precise, controlled quality of a woman who had been awake for 30 hours and was running entirely on competence and caffeine. "Maya, I've been trying to reach you." "I was sleeping," Maya said. "What do I need to know?" "The federal investigators want to speak with you," Elena said. "Not as a suspect, they're very clear about that. As a material witness. The evidence package you sent, the timestamp, the routing, the summary document you attached, it's going to be a significant part of the case. They want to understand the chain of custody." Maya sat up. "When they'd prefer this week." "I told them I'd relay the request." A pause. "I want to be your attorney for that conversation. There's no conflict, you're not part of any investigation. But I'd feel better if you had representation when you talk to federal investigators." Maya thought about this. "You're Vincent's attorney." "I'm also an attorney who can represent multiple parties in a situation where those parties' interests don't conflict," Elena said. "Your interests and Vincent's interests in this matter are aligned. You both want Raymond prosecuted. You both want the legitimate company protected." Another pause, and her voice shifted slightly. "Not much, but enough. I also want to do it because what you did last night was remarkable, and you should have someone in your corner." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said, "set it up." She called Vincent next. He answered immediately, and she could hear from the first syllable that he had also not slept. And unlike her, he had not compensated for that by sleeping 6 hours in the afternoon. He sounded like a man who had been in rooms full of lawyers and federal agents and corporate board members since 5 in the morning and was still in one of those rooms now. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm fine," she said. "Slept," Elena called. "I'm going to talk to the investigators." "I know," she told me when he stopped himself. Started again. "I want to make sure you're protected in that conversation." "Elena's covering it," Maya said. "I don't need you to manage this. I need you to focus on what you need to focus on." She paused. "How is it going?" A long exhale. "The board met at 9 this morning. Emergency session. I gave them everything, the full audit report, the forensic accounting, my own disclosure of the parts of the organization that were not legitimate before I took over. All of it." He paused. "They were not happy. Were they going to prosecute you?" "They're deciding." Elena believes that the voluntary disclosure, combined with the cooperation with federal investigators, will result in oversight and penalties rather than prosecution. But that's not confirmed. Another pause. "Some of the old operations, I'm going to have to dissolve them. Formally. With documentation. There are going to be financial penalties that are significant." "How significant?" he told her. She sat with the number. "That's most of what you have." "Yes," he said. "And you're doing it anyway." "Yes," he said again, with a simplicity that carried inside it everything he had decided in the moment he had lowered his hands in that warehouse. Maya looked at her ceiling. "Okay," he said back. And then after a moment, "Maya." The board asked who compiled the evidence summary, the plain language document in the package. They said it was the clearest financial fraud explanation they had read in 30 years of combined experience. She said nothing. "I told them it was written by a waitress," he said. Elena corrected me. "She said it was written by someone with 2 years of accounting coursework and 4 years of operational management experience who happened to currently be working as a waitress." Maya felt something move through her chest that was not quite pride and not quite grief, but lived in the space between them, the feeling of being seen accurately after a long time of being seen only partially. "I appreciate the correction," she said. "She's right," he said. And I'm going to keep saying it until the language catches up to the truth of who you are. She did not respond to that. Not because she didn't have a response, but because the response she had was not one she was ready to give over a phone call at 2 in the afternoon after 30 hours without real sleep. She filed it away. Go back to your lawyers, she said. I'll see you when things settle. Tonight? He said. Maybe not tonight, she said. Maybe not for a few nights. You have things to handle, so do I. Paused. The diner. The diner, she confirmed. I'll come when I can, he said. The coffee will be fresh, she said. She hung up. The federal interview happened 2 days later, in a conference room in a federal building downtown with Elena sitting next to her and 2 investigators across the table who were professional and thorough and asked their questions in the careful, non-leading way that federal investigators ask questions when they are building something they intend to make airtight. Maya answered everything directly and completely. She explained the payment cycling pattern she had identified in the documents Vincent had left on the counter. She explained the intercom sequence and the evidence transmission. She explained the timing and what she had observed on the camera feeds. One of the investigators, a woman in her 40s named Agent Soren, looked at Maya at the end of the interview and said, "You had no obligation to do any of this." Maya looked at her. 340 employees, she said, with mortgages and kids. Agent Soren looked at her for a moment. Right, she said, and wrote something in her notes. The following week was a kind of sustained intensity that Maya had no template for because nothing in her life had prepared her for the particular experience of being at the periphery of something that was simultaneously a criminal prosecution, a corporate restructuring, and a public story that people were talking about in the diner while she poured their coffee. She heard her customers discussing it. A man in booth 4 telling his companion that the Moretti organization was finally being dismantled. 2 women at the counter saying they had heard the owner was cooperating with federal investigators. An older man who came in every Tuesday and whose name she knew was Cal, saying that it was about time somebody held those people accountable. She poured Cal's coffee and said nothing, because it was not her story to tell in this setting, and because Cal deserved his opinion and his coffee without commentary from someone who knew more than he did. Vincent came back to the diner on a Thursday, 11 days after the arrest. He came at 2:15. He sat on his stool. She had the coffee waiting. He looked different. Not dramatically, he was still Vincent, still the particular stillness and the controlled affect that was native to him. But something had shifted in the quality of it. The tension that had always lived around his jaw and eyes, the kind of tension that came from years of being ready for the next crisis, had loosened by a fraction, not gone, but looser. He sat down and wrapped both hands around the mug and said, "The board accepted the oversight structure. Federal oversight for 3 years, external auditor, appointed by the court, independent board chair who I don't select. All legitimate operations continue under those conditions. The questionable ones are being dissolved through a monitored process." And the employee said, "Kept," he said, "all of them." The board agreed that disrupting the legitimate workforce was not consistent with the restructuring goals. He paused. That argument came from Elena, but the language she used came from something you said. Maya poured herself a cup of coffee she rarely drank at the counter, but it was a slow hour, and she needed it and leaned against the back counter. What language? That the employees who took jobs with the company did so because they were promised a legal operation, that they made a decision based on a promise, and that the promise created an obligation. He looked at his coffee. Elena said it in the board meeting, and 3 of the 6 board members who had been on the fence moved to supporting the retention plan. Maya looked at her cup. "Good," she said. They sat in the comfortable quiet that had become one of the things she valued most about this particular hour, the quality of silence between 2 people who did not need to fill it with noise. After a while, Vincent said, "Raymond's attorney is going to argue that I was complicit in the earlier operations, that I knew about the fraud and sanctioned it." Maya looked at him. "It's not true," he said. "But it's the defense he's building. If it gains traction, the oversight agreement could be voided, and I go from cooperating witness to co-defendant." She set down her cup. "Can Elena counter it?" "She's working on it. The timeline of the fraud predates my active management. There are records showing Raymond had access and authority that I didn't monitor closely enough, but that's different from directing the fraud." He paused. "The problem is that the jury pool in a case like this is going to hear the name Moretti and have an opinion before any evidence is presented. Then you need someone to explain the difference between inheriting a position and building one," Maya said. "Not in a courtroom in public. Before the courtroom." He looked at her. "You mean I mean that the story being told about you right now is Raymond's story, she said. A Moretti cooperating with federal investigators sounds like damage control, unless people understand what it actually cost you and why you did it. She paused. Not to make people like you. To make the record accurate. He was quiet. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. I know, she said. I'm not saying you have to be comfortable with it. I'm saying it's true and that true things, told clearly, have a way of holding up better than managed narratives. She looked at him. You could talk to Elena about it. About whether there's a way to get your perspective on record that doesn't compromise the legal process. He held her gaze. Would you help me with it? If we did something like that? She thought about it honestly. I can tell you what I observed, she said. What you said. How you changed the decisions you made. I can tell that clearly because it's what I saw. She paused. But I'm not doing it to protect you from consequences. I'm doing it because the truth is more complicated than what's in the papers. And complicated truths deserve to be told. Even if the complicated truth includes the parts that make me look bad, he said. Especially those, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. You know, he said, most people in your position would be asking for something right now. I know, she said, you're not going to. No, she said. He shook his head slowly, not in frustration, but in something that was close to wonder. Why? She looked at him directly. Because asking for things from someone who has more power than you do, when they are already aware of what you need, is how you end up owing them something you didn't intend to give. She paused. And because I don't want anything from you that I can't earn myself. That's always been true. He sat with that. He drank his coffee. The clock above the counter moved from 2:51 to 3:04. Then he said, Harbor Light needs repairs. She looked at him. Structural, he said. The roof over the back section has been deteriorating for 2 years. The electrical panel is original to the building and needs to be brought up to code. There are 3 other items on the building inspector's deferred list that the owner has been ignoring. He paused. The storm last week did real damage to the roof. The diner is going to need to close temporarily. Maya felt this land. She knew about the roof. She had been putting buckets under the 2 spots where water came through during heavy rain and not telling the building owner, because the building owner's response to any maintenance request was to threaten a rent increase. She had been managing it and putting off the conversation and hoping the roof would survive another season. It had not survived another season. I know, she said. I've been aware. The owner is planning to close the building for the repairs and use the closure as justification to void the diner's lease, he said. It's not legal, but by the time you could fight it, the window for reopening in that location would be gone. Maya absorbed it. She was quiet for a moment because the thing rising inside her was not panic. She had processed panic out of her system a long time ago by sheer necessity, but it was the particular sharp feeling of something she had built being threatened by. Forces that had nothing to do with her performance or her choices. How do you know about the lease situation, she said. Because I looked into it, he said simply. After Raymond's men came here, I wanted to understand your situation. She looked at him. There was a line there between someone looking into her situation because they cared about her and someone looking into her situation because they wanted leverage. And the line was not always obvious from the outside. But she knew Vincent well enough by now to understand which side he was standing on. And she also knew herself well enough to know that understanding which side he was on did not automatically mean she was comfortable with the information. You should have asked me first, she said. He held her gaze. You're right, I should have. He did not make excuses for it. He simply acknowledged it. She nodded once. Okay, the building is for sale, he said. The owner has been quietly looking for a buyer for 8 months. The repairs are the excuse to sell at a loss and move on. He paused. I can buy it. Maya looked at him. Not as a gift, he said quickly. And she recognized that he had anticipated her response, which meant he had been thinking carefully about how to have this conversation. Not as something I give you, as an investment with documented terms. You would negotiate the lease as a tenant with a long-term contract, rent-controlled, written by Elena and reviewed by an attorney of your choosing. I own the building. You operate the diner. We have no other financial relationship unless you choose one. She was quiet for a long time. That's a significant amount of money, she said. I have significant amounts of money. Fewer of them than I had a month ago, but enough. He paused. The building is worth the investment separate from any personal interest. The waterfront block is developing. The property value is going to increase. You're making the financial case, she said. I'm making the financial case, he confirmed, because I know you won't accept a reason that is only personal. She looked at the counter. She looked at the diner around her, The fluorescent light over the third booth, which now had a working bulb, after she had finally put in the request herself. The patched cushions. The coffee machine that sputtered when it ran low. The 4 years of her life that had been built in this space. In this specific, ordinary, extraordinary place that had become the ground she stood on. I need to think about it, she said. I know, he said. Take the time you need. But the sale discussion with the owner is moving, and there's a timeline. How much time? 2 weeks, said, maybe 3. She nodded. She would think about it. She would not decide out of fear or gratitude or the kind of emotional pressure that came from being exhausted and afraid of losing something. She would think about it the way she thought about everything carefully, practically, with full awareness of what she was agreeing to and what it might cost her. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he confirmed. He finished his coffee. He put $8 on the counter. He stood up and put on his coat, and then he stopped and said, without looking at her directly, I started seeing someone. A therapist she comes highly recommended. A pause. I'm going to say this badly, so bear with me. The reason I started is because I realized that the way I've managed things, the distance, the control, the systems I built around myself to keep people from getting close enough to matter, it was doing damage I couldn't see clearly. And then someone made it very clear, without saying it directly, that a person could choose something different. He paused. I thought you should know. Maya looked at him. I'm glad, she said. He nodded. He walked toward the door. She watched him reach it. Vincent, she said. He turned. The fact that you're doing it, she said. That's the part that matters, not why. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pushed open the door and walked out into the Baltimore night that was starting very slowly to become early morning. Maya picked up his empty mug. She washed it by hand, which she did not always do with the mugs. She had a whole rack system for the machine. But tonight, she washed it by hand and set it on the drying rack and thought about buildings and leases and what it would mean to own. The thing you had been running on borrowed ground. She thought about her mother, who had spent the last 3 years of her life fighting an illness in a system that treated her dignity as optional and her time as expendable. She thought about the version of herself who had left college and come to this diner and told herself every year that the plan was still alive, just delayed. She thought about what it would mean to stop delaying it. She thought about what Vincent had said, about the financial case, about the documented terms, about Elena reviewing the contract and an attorney of her choosing. She thought about the difference between accepting help and accepting control. They were not the same thing. She had known that for a long time, but the knowing had always been theoretical, because nobody with the power to help her had ever been careful enough with the distinction to make the practical choice real. She went back to work. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved the way things moved when a situation had been in stasis for a long time, and then broke loose all at once. Raymond's legal defense made the argument Vincent's attorney had predicted that Vincent had been aware of and complicit in the fraud, and Elena dismantled it methodically and completely, using the timeline of the voluntary disclosure, the audit records, and the testimony of the external auditor who had found no evidence that Vincent had directed or benefited from the specific transactions at issue. The argument collapsed by the end of the second week. Vincent sold 3 properties connected to the old organization to fund the restitution requirements. He sold them without drama and without announcement and without appearing to calculate whether the amount would impress anyone, which was the thing Maya noticed most, that he was not performing the sacrifice. He was simply doing it, the way you did something that needed to be done when you had finally accepted that it needed to be done. Grant came into the diner one afternoon. During Maya's shift, the regular afternoon shift, she had picked up to cover some additional hours and sat at the counter and ordered coffee and pie and said almost nothing for 20 minutes. Then he said, I've been offered a position, head of corporate security for the legitimate operation, under the new oversight structure. Maya looked at him. What do you think? I think it's a real job, with a real salary and benefits and legal everything. He said the word legal with the careful emphasis of a man for whom legality had been, for a long time, a theoretical concept. I think I'd be good at it. You would be, she said. You're good at reading situations, and you're good at making people feel safe. That translates. He looked at his pie. You've known me for 2 months. I've watched you every night for 2 months, she said. I know what I've seen. He was quiet. Vincent said you'd say something like that. Vincent is right sometimes, she said. Grant ate his pie. He left a $20 tip on a $6 check. Maya put it in the tip jar without making it a thing, because he needed to give it and she needed to receive it, and that was all it had to be. On the 14th day, Maya called Elena. The building, she said. I want to look at the terms. Elena sent over a draft lease within 2 hours. Maya took it to a real estate attorney. She found him through a legal aid referral service, which was free to use, and she paid him his flat rate for contract review out of the $500 from the first night that had been sitting in a specific pocket of her wallet ever since, because she had never known what to do with it. And now he reviewed the lease. He called her the following day and told her it was one of the cleanest long-term commercial leases he had seen in 20 years of practice. Rent controlled for the full 15-year term. Full operational independence. No authority granted to the building owner over staffing, pricing, operations, or management decisions. Standard maintenance obligations clearly delineated. Early exit clauses that protected her, not the landlord. Whoever drafted this, he said, was working to protect you. I know, Maya said. She called Elena. Tell him yes, she said. And tell him I want to negotiate one change to the terms. What change? The initial rent is too low, Maya said. The market rate for a building like this in that location is higher. I want to pay market rate. Silence on the line. Maya, Elena said carefully. Most tenants negotiate down, not up. I know, Maya said. I want to pay what the space is worth. Not a number that's a favor. A number that's a transaction, she paused. I don't need his charity. I need his investment. Those are different things, and the difference matters to me. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll tell him. She called back 40 minutes later. He said yes. He also said, a pause that sounded like Elena was deciding whether to relay the quote accurately. He said, of course she did. Maya smiled, just a little. Tell him I'll have the signed lease back by the end of the week. She signed it on a Friday evening at the small table in her apartment with a pen she had borrowed from her neighbor because she did not own a good pen, and she wanted this signature to feel like what it was, a real thing, a permanent thing, a thing she was doing on purpose. She dated it. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it in an envelope addressed to Elena's office, and she walked it to the mailbox on the corner, and she dropped it in. And she stood there for a moment in the early November air that was carrying the first real edge of winter in it. Harbor Light was going to close for repairs. It was going to close for weeks, maybe 2 months. While the roof and the electrical and the deferred items were addressed by a contractor she had not yet chosen but would choose herself, because the terms of the lease gave her the right to approve building work, and she was going to exercise that right from the first day. And then it was going to reopen. She had not decided yet what it would look like when it reopened. She had ideas, real ideas, the kind that had been accumulating for 4 years of working in a space she did not control and watching all the things that could be better. The staffing model, the wages, the training, the second chance employment program for people rebuilding after hardship, which she had been thinking about since the night she had watched 2 of her customers, a man who had done time for a nonviolent offense, and a woman who had come through a difficult divorce with nothing, talk to each other with the ease of people, who had found somewhere that did not ask them to be more or less than they were. The ideas were real. The plan was real. She was going to write it down and build it carefully and do it right. She walked back toward the diner. She had 3 hours left in her shift. The cook needed to be briefed on the week's specials. The overnight schedule needed to be confirmed. There was a leaking seal on the dishwasher that she had been documenting for the building owner's records, which were now going to be her records, which meant she could simply fix it without asking permission. She was going to fix it tomorrow. Tonight she had a shift to finish and coffee to pour, and 4 years of knowing exactly how to make this particular diner run well. And those 4 years belonged to her in a way that nobody, not a building owner, not a man with money, not Raymond Vale or anyone like him, had ever been able to take away, because they lived in her, not in the lease agreement, not in the building. She pushed open the door. The bell above it rang. She went back to work. He had remembered the coffee shop. That was the thing Maya noticed first, when Vincent appeared at her door at 11:30 with 2 cups from the corner place she had mentioned exactly once, 3 weeks ago, in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely. She had not emphasized it. She had not said it was her favorite. She had said it in passing, the way you mention a detail that is true but not important. And he had retained it the way she retained everything, quietly, without making a production of it, filing it away for a moment when it would be useful. She opened the door and looked at the cups and said nothing about it. She just stepped back and let him in. Her apartment was small and organized with the particular precision of someone who had learned early that small spaces became unlivable when they were not managed carefully. She had the business plan spread across the kitchen table, 40 pages, printed and annotated in the margins with the red pen she used when she was reading her own work critically. Financial projections on the left side of the table. Staffing model on the right. The center covered by the operational framework she had been revising for the past 2 days. Vincent looked at the table when he walked in. He did not touch anything. He stood at the edge of it and looked at the spread of pages, the way someone looked at something they recognized as serious work. "Can I?" he said, gesturing at the pages. "That's why I said yes when you called," she said. She took her coffee and sat in the chair across from him and watched him read. He was a fast reader. She had noticed that at the diner, when he occasionally brought documents with him, but he was also thorough, the kind of reader who slowed down when something required it, rather than moving at uniform speed. She watched him slow down at the staffing model. She watched him slow down again at the second chance employment section. He read that section twice. When he looked up, his expression had the particular quality of someone who had been given something unexpected. "The wage floor you've set," he said. "It's above the city living wage standard." "It's what it actually costs to live in this city," she said. "The living wage standard is a calculation made by people who don't live on it." He looked at the number again. "Your margin projections account for it." "They do," she said. "It requires a higher volume model and tighter cost controls in the kitchen, but both are achievable. The restaurant management literature is clear. Higher base wages reduce turnover, and turnover is the most expensive operational cost in food service. Most owners know this and choose the short-term lower cost anyway, because they're thinking about this quarter, not next year." "You're thinking about next year," he said. "I'm thinking about year 5, she said. "That's when the model becomes genuinely self-sustaining." He set the pages down carefully, aligned with the edges of the table the way she had them. He picked up his coffee. He looked at her across the table, and there was something in the look that she had seen building for a long time, not the assessment he had used in those first weeks, when he was still categorizing her, but something more direct, something that had decided. "I want to talk about the investment structure," he said. "I know," she said. "That's also why I said yes." He looked at the table. "The lease is done. The building repairs are on track. But the renovation, the interior changes you want, for the reopening, that's a separate capital requirement. And the business plan shows a funding gap in the first 6 months. $40,000, she said. "I know the number. I'd like to cover it," he said, "as a structured loan. Fixed interest rate, market rate, 5-year repayment. Elena drafts the documents. You have your attorney review them." He paused. "No equity, no authority over operations. A loan between two people who have a documented repayment schedule." Maya looked at him. She had been expecting something like this, which was why she had spent 2 days before this meeting working out exactly how she felt about it, going through every angle of the question until she reached something she could stand on without reservation. "Why a loan and not an investment?" she said. "Equity would give you return exposure if the model works." "Because you don't want a partner," he said. "You want a creditor. A creditor has rights that end at repayment. A partner has ongoing authority." He held her gaze. "I know the difference matters to you. I'm offering the one that fits." She sat with this for a moment. She had been so prepared to explain the difference to him that his having already understood it landed differently than she had expected. "Market rate interest," she said. "Market rate," he confirmed. "If I'm late on a payment, which I don't anticipate, but if standard cure period, no acceleration clause." He looked at her. "You've been reading loan documentation." "I've been reading everything," she said. "Yes or no on the cure period?" "Yes," he said. "Standard 30-day cure." "Elena will write it that way." Maya looked at her business plan. She looked at the $40,000 gap in the projections, which she had been staring at for a week, and which she had not been able to close through any combination of her own savings and realistic revenue acceleration. She had looked at small business loans. She had looked at community development financial institutions. The terms available to her, a woman with no collateral, a service industry plan, and a credit history that showed years of paying minimums on medical debt, were not the terms Vincent was offering. The terms Vincent was offering were the terms a person got when they had substantial assets and established credit and a track record of successful operations. She did not have those things yet, but she had a plan that was worth those terms. She knew it was. She had read enough business plans to know the difference between a plan that described a hope and a plan that described a system. And what she had on this table was a system. "Yes," she said. Vincent nodded once. He did not smile or express relief or do any of the things that signaled he had been waiting for a particular answer. He just nodded, the way you acknowledged something you had expected to be true. Elena will have the documents by Friday, he said. I'll have them to my attorney by Monday, she said. He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. They sat at her kitchen table with 41 pages of her future between them and drank their coffee in the quiet that had always been the most honest thing between them. After a while, he said, my therapist asked me last week why I keep coming back to the diner. I mean, why it specifically, why from the beginning. I've been thinking about how to answer it accurately. Maya looked at him. What did you say? I said that it was the first place in a long time where nobody wanted anything from me, he said. And then I thought about it more and realized that wasn't entirely true. He paused. You wanted something from me. You wanted me to behave like a decent person. You just didn't want it as a transaction. You weren't offering me something in exchange for it. You were just requiring it as the baseline. Maya looked at her coffee cup. That's not an unusual standard, she said. Most people who come into a diner are required to behave decently. Most people comply because they're afraid of consequences, he said. You required it because you believed it was possible. That's different. He paused. I hadn't had someone believe that about me in a very long time. Maybe ever. She did not say anything for a moment. She let the sentence be what it was without trying to manage it into something smaller. How is it going? She said. The therapy. Hard, he said immediately, without the hesitation that would have been there 6 weeks ago. She has me doing this thing where I track the moments when I feel the impulse to control a situation and instead I just sit in it, without moving. It's the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done, and I was shot once. Maya looked at him. Yes, he said, which makes it more annoying. She almost laughed, actually laughed quietly, briefly, the kind that escaped before she decided to allow it, which was the best kind. He watched her laugh with an expression that had nothing strategic in it. I enrolled back in school, she said, 2 courses, hospitality management and accounting. Something moved across his face, quick, then contained. When did you start? First week of the closure, she said. I had the time and I needed to use it, or I was going to reorganize my kitchen for the 4th time. How is it, he said. The accounting is easy, she said. The hospitality management is interesting because I've been doing it for 4 years, and the gap between what the textbook says and what actually happens in a real service environment is considerable. She paused. I'm annotating the textbook. My professor has started using my annotations in class discussion, which I find both satisfying and slightly alarming. He looked at her across the table. You're going to finish the degree. Yes, she said. It was the first time she had said it as a certainty rather than a plan. She heard the difference herself. Yes, I am. 3 weeks later, the repairs to Harbor Light were complete. Maya walked through the building with the contractor for the final inspection, checking every item against the scope of work with the same methodical attention she had applied to every inventory count and every financial document she had reviewed over the past several months. The roof was solid. The electrical panel was replaced and certified. The ventilation system in the kitchen was new and significantly more efficient than what had been there before. And when she stood in the kitchen and felt the airflow and heard the reduced noise level, she thought about the 4 years of working in that kitchen in summer, when the old system couldn't manage the heat, and made a quiet promise to the people who would work in it going forward that they would not have that experience. The completion documents. She paid the contractor the leasehold improvement portion from her business account, which she had opened 2 weeks earlier, and which had her name on it and only her name on it, which still gave her a feeling every time she looked at it that she could not fully describe, but that lived somewhere in the territory between relief and arrival. Then she started the renovation. She had done the design herself, working from the structural layout she knew by heart and the vision she had been carrying for 4 years. She was not making Harbor Light into something unrecognizable. She was making it into what it had always been trying to be. The bones of the place were good. The location was good. What it had needed was someone who understood it completely and had the authority to make it right. She hired the renovation crew herself. She managed the schedule herself. She made decisions on materials and finishes with the practical eye of someone who had spent 4 years watching what held up under daily service and what didn't. And she made those decisions without asking anyone's opinion because the decisions were hers to make and she knew what she was doing. When the contractor's foreman, a man named David, who had been skeptical in the first meeting and had become genuinely impressed by the third, said during the 2nd week, "You know you could have hired a designer for this," she said. "I know. I chose not to." He looked at the layout she had marked out. "It's going to be good," he said with the particular directness of someone who did not offer opinions casually. "I know," she said. "Vincent came by during the renovation once. He called first, as always. He arrived during a break in the work, when the crew was out and the space was quiet, and he walked through it the way she had walked through it on the contractor completion day, observing, not commenting, letting the space be what it was without imposing interpretation on it. She watched him stand in the middle of the main floor and look at the changes. The counter was the same. She had kept the counter because the counter was right. It had always been right. It was the bones of everything this place was. But the lighting was different. The booth configuration was different. The wall where the water damage had been repaired was now painted a color she had chosen for the specific quality of warmth it would have at 2 in the morning, which was not something she had said to anyone, but which was something she had thought about. "It feels bigger," he said. "Same square footage," she said. "Different flow. I moved 2 booths and changed the angle of the service station. When a space is laid out for how people actually move through it, rather than how someone in 9987 thought they would move through it, it reads as larger." He looked at her. "How do you know how people move through it?" "4 years of watching them," she said. He nodded. He looked at the counter. He looked at the stool at the far end, which was the same stool she had kept the stools to. Had them reupholstered in a fabric that would last, instead of the vinyl that had been patched with electrical tape for years. "Same stool," he said. "Same stool," she confirmed. He looked at it for a moment. "Good." She showed him the staffing board she had set up in the back office. Not because she needed his approval, she did not, but because the board represented something she was proud of, and she had learned over the past months that pride was not something to apologize for, that sharing a thing you had built carefully with someone who would understand it accurately was different from seeking validation. He looked at the board. 12 positions, each with a role description, a starting wage, and a training pathway marked in her handwriting. 3 positions marked with a specific notation, the second chance allocation, each with its own onboarding structure, and a 6-month mentorship pairing. "You already have candidates," he said, looking at the notes next to 2 of the 3 second chance positions. "I've been talking to a reentry program through the public library for 2 months, she said. "They have candidates who are ready. I have 2 who I'm seriously considering. Both have service industry experience from before. Both have completed their program requirements. Both have references from their case managers that are genuinely strong, not just technically adequate." He looked at her. "You've been building this for 2 months. "I've been building this for 4 years, she said. 2 months ago, I started being able to act on it." He looked at the board for another moment. "What do you need from me before opening?" She had thought about this question. She had prepared for it because she had known it was coming, and she had wanted to answer it accurately rather than reflexively. "Nothing operational," she said. "The loan is documented. The lease is signed. The renovation is on budget and on schedule." She paused. "The one thing I'd like, and this is a request, not a requirement, is for you to come to the opening. Not as an investor, not in any official capacity, just as someone who was part of how this happened." He looked at her steadily. "I'll be there," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the staffing board. Then she picked up the red pen from the desk and made a note she had been planning to make for 2 days. And the note was the final name on the mentorship pairing list for the 3rd second chance position, her own name, because she had decided she was going to run the mentorship herself for the first cohort, not delegate it. If you were going to build something you believed in, you put yourself in it. The opening was on a Saturday in early March, and Baltimore decided to cooperate with the occasion by producing the kind of early spring day that the city occasionally offered as an apology for its winters, not warm exactly, but bright, with the specific quality of light that made everything look a little more resolved than it had the day before. Maya arrived at 5 in the morning, not because the opening was at 10, not because there was a crisis. She arrived at 5 because this was her place, and she wanted to be in it before anyone else was, to walk through it in the quiet and know it as hers before it became, for the rest of this day and every day after, a public space full of other people and their needs and their stories. She walked the floor. She ran her hand along the counter. She stood in the kitchen and checked every station, not because she doubted the prep work her kitchen manager, a woman named Rosa who had 20 years of experience and a laugh that could fill a room and who had been the best hire Maya had ever made, had done it perfectly the day before. She checked it because this was the first time it was her kitchen to check, and she was going to do it properly. She made herself a cup of coffee. She stood at the counter and drank it. She looked at the dining room of the harbor table, because that was the name now, the name she had chosen, because it said what she wanted it to say. A table for the harbor, for everyone who worked it and lived near it and passed through it, a table that made room. She thought about her mother, not with the particular grief that had accompanied those thoughts for years, the kind that arrived with an undertow of guilt and anger and the unanswerable question of whether things could have been different. She thought about her mother with clarity. Her mother had been a woman who understood exactly what she was worth and had spent her entire life in circumstances that did not reflect that understanding. She had not been defeated by the gap. She had simply never had the opportunity to close it. Maya had the opportunity. She was closing it. The staff arrived at 8. 12 people in the clean uniforms Maya had designed, not the faded branded shirts that most diners put their employees in, but something that looked professional and felt comfortable and did not make the people wearing it feel like they were dressed for someone else's idea of service work. They arrived and Maya gathered them in the dining room, and she did not give a speech because speeches at moments like this had a way of becoming about the speaker, and this moment was about all of them together. She said, "This place pays fairly because you deserve fair pay. It has benefits from your first month because you deserve to be healthy. It has a training structure because I believe every one of you is capable of more than your current role, and I intend to prove that over the next few years." She paused. "What I ask from you is the same thing I ask from myself. Show up. Be honest. Take care of the people who come through that door. That's the whole job." Rosa, standing at the edge of the group, nodded. One of the second chance hires a man named James, who was 38 years old and who had the careful, watchful, someone learning to trust a new environment straightened slightly in the way that people straightened when something they had been braced against did not arrive. The doors opened at 10. The first 2 hours were controlled chaos, which was exactly what Maya had expected and prepared for. The coverage model she had built assumed a high-volume opening day, and the kitchen ran at pace without falling behind, which was the Rosa effect, and the effect of 3 weeks of rehearsal that Maya had insisted on before opening, actual service simulations with real food, because she believed that the only way to know if a system worked was to run it before it mattered. The customers came from everywhere. Dock workers from the waterfront who had eaten at Harbor Light for years and who looked around at the changes with the particular expression of regulars encountering improvement, cautiously approving, not yet ready to commit to enthusiasm. Nurses from the hospital 4 blocks away who recognized the hours on the sign and understood immediately what 24-hour service meant for a rotating shift schedule. People from the neighborhood who had been watching the renovation for weeks and had opinions, mostly positive. By noon, every table was full. By 2 in the afternoon, Maya had handled 2 kitchen timing issues, one staffing coverage gap when a server felt genuinely unwell and needed to go home, and a problem with the point-of-sale system that required a 30-minute reconfiguration that she performed herself because she had learned the system completely before opening. She handled all 3 without raising her voice and without communicating stress to the floor, because she had learned long ago that a manager's panic was contagious in a way that a manager's steadiness was also contagious, and she chose steadiness. At 3 in the afternoon, a woman came in alone and sat at the counter and asked for coffee and the soup of the day, and when Maya brought it, she said quietly, "I heard you hire people who are rebuilding. I need work, I'm rebuilding." Maya looked at her. She was maybe 50. She had the look of someone who had been through something difficult and was still in the middle of the coming out the other side part. "What's your name?" Maya said. "Carol," she said. "Have you worked in food service before?" 15 years, Carol said. Then things happened. "It's been 2 years since I've had regular work." Maya looked at her for a moment. She thought about the staffing board in the back office. She thought about the third second chance position, which had a candidate she was still evaluating. "Finish your soup," she said, "and then come find me in the back. We're going to talk." Carol looked at her. Something in Carol's face did a complicated thing, not quite breaking, but close to it, the way faces did when something they had stopped expecting arrived without warning. "Thank you," Carol said. "Don't thank me yet," Maya said. "I have standards. You're going to have to meet them." She paused. "I think you probably can, but we'll find out together." She went back to work. Vincent arrived at 6:30. She saw him come in from across the room. She was at the far table, talking to a couple who were celebrating something. She could tell from the way they were leaning toward each other, and she excused herself and met him at the door. He was alone. No coat this time, just a jacket. A different version of him than the one that had walked into Harbor Light, bleeding and demanding in a rainstorm, and yet unmistakably the same person. She had never lost track of that. She was not someone who forgot what a person had been on their way to becoming who they were now. Busy, he said, looking at the full room. It's opening day, she said. Ask me how it looks on a random Tuesday in October. That's the real number. He looked at her. How do you feel? She thought about answering quickly, the way she sometimes answered to move past a question. She decided not to do that. Like I did the right thing, she said. The whole way through. Every decision. Even the ones that were hard. She paused. It's a strange feeling. I'm not used to it yet. He held her gaze. Get used to it, he said. She walked him to the end of the counter. She was not surprised when he sat on the stool at the far end, the same stool, reupholstered, but unmistakably the same position. The corner where a person could see everything and be seen by nothing if they chose. She poured his coffee without asking. She set it in front of him. She went back to work because her restaurant was full and her staff needed her and the soup station needed to be refreshed, and Carol was in the back office filling out paperwork with the careful attention of someone who understood what the paperwork meant. But she moved through the dining room differently than she had ever moved through Harbor Light Diner. She moved through it the way you moved through a place that belonged to you, not with ownership in the possessive sense, but in the sense of being responsible for it, accountable to it, in relationship with it in a way that was mutual and real. She knew every square foot of it. She had chosen every detail of it. She knew the names of the people working in it and the names of the regular customers who had already started coming back. And she would learn the names of the new ones because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. Around 7:15, when the dinner rush was at its peak and every table was occupied, and the sound of the room had reached that particular volume that a good restaurant produced, not too loud, not too quiet, the sound of people being fed and being comfortable and being in a place that was genuinely glad to have them, Maya came back to the end of the counter. Vincent was on his second cup. She could tell, because the first cup was empty and pushed slightly to the side the way he always pushed it when he was done, a habit she had cataloged without meaning to over months of watching him at this counter. She refilled the second cup. He looked up at her. The coffee, he said. Still fresh. Always fresh, she said. He looked around the room. She watched him take it in the full tables, the working staff, the light she had chosen for the quality of warmth it produced at this hour, the sound of a room that was functioning at the level she had designed it for. You built this, he said. Yes, she said. Not because of me, he said. It was not a question. It was not a challenge. It was a man saying something accurate out loud, getting it right. No, she said. Not because of you. You were an accelerant. A specific kind of pressure applied at a specific time that made certain things happen faster than they would have otherwise. She looked at him directly. But the thing that happened was already in here. I was already this person. I had been this person my entire life. I just needed the ground to be stable enough to stand on. He held her gaze for a long moment. The noise of the room moved around them. I'm sorry it wasn't stable sooner, he said. She looked at him. This, she thought, was the sentence that had taken him a long time to get to. Not because he had been avoiding it, but because arriving at it genuinely, without performance, required the kind of work he had been doing in a therapist's office for months. She recognized it for what it was. An apology not for something he had done to her specifically, but for the entire structure of a world that had made her stability contingent on other people's choices, and his acknowledgement that he had been part of that structure. Thank you, she said. And she meant it simply, without layers, the way she meant the things she said when she had decided they were true. He nodded. He picked up his coffee. At 8 o'clock, James, the second chance hire, who had straightened during Maya's opening address, came to the end of the counter on his break and set down a cup of tea he had made himself and sat for a moment and said, to no one in particular, I didn't know a place like this existed. Maya was behind the counter refilling a prep container. She looked at him. Like what? Like where you come in and they just treat you like you're somebody, he said, from the start. Like they're not waiting for you to prove you deserve it. She looked at him for a moment. That's the baseline, she said. Around here, that's just the baseline. James looked at his tea. He nodded slowly, like he was processing something that was going to take a while to become fully real. Vincent was 2 stools down, and Maya did not look at him, but she was aware of him in the peripheral way. She was always aware of what was happening at her counter, and she knew he had heard it. The night moved, the tables turned, the kitchen stayed on pace. Rosa, At 9 o'clock, came out from the back long enough to tell Maya that the ventilation system was running so quietly that you could actually hear people talking in there, and said it with the reverence of a woman who had spent 20 years cooking in industrial kitchens. And Maya felt a satisfaction at that was physical. Carol, who had turned out to have exactly the instincts Maya had suspected when she looked at her, was running the counter section with the practiced efficiencies of someone who had been doing it for 15 years and had not lost a single reflex. She refilled cups without being asked. She remembered orders. She moved between customers with a quiet attentiveness that was not servility but skill. And Maya watched her for 3 full minutes at 9:30 and thought, yes, that's the right hire. At 10:15, the pace began to ease. The late dinner crowd had mostly cleared. The overnight crowd had not yet arrived. The room settled into the particular quality of a late evening restaurant, doing steady business, a few tables, steady counter service, the kitchen managing a comfortable pace instead of the controlled sprint of the peak hours. Maya came back to the end of the counter. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her 4th of the day, more than she usually allowed herself. But today was not a usual day, and she leaned against the back counter and she looked at her restaurant. All of it. The full sweep of what she had built. Vincent was still on his stool. She had not asked him to stay. He had not announced he was staying. He was simply still there, the way he had been simply there every night for months, occupying his corner of her world with the quiet consistency that was. She had come to understand his most honest quality. She looked at him. He looked at her. Complaint? She said. He looked at his cup. He looked at her. And then he said, with a particular dead that she had discovered underneath the severity of him, around week 4 of the arrangement, the deadpan she had never expected and had never stopped appreciating. The coffee was late. She looked at him. She raised an eyebrow. She held the look for a beat, the exact beat required for the callback to land, and then she said, careful. You remember what happened the last time you complained about the coffee? He smiled, a real one, the kind that reached everything. You ended the man I used to be, he said. The room moved around them, her staff, her customers, her restaurant. The things she had built out of 4 years of steadiness and 2 months of upheaval, and a lifetime of knowing exactly what she was worth even when the world around her had not known what to do with that knowledge. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked across the room that was hers, not borrowed, not contingent, not held at someone else's sufferance. Hers. Built by her hands and her mind and her absolute refusal, across a long and difficult life, to let anyone convince her that dignity was something she needed to earn rather than something she had arrived with. Good, she said. She picked up her coffee. She went back to work. Not because a dangerous man had chosen her. Not because a situation had forced her. Not because someone with power had decided she was worthy of an opportunity. Because this was her place, and there were people in it who needed her, and she was exactly who she had always been, a woman who showed up, told the truth, held the line, and turned whatever ground she stood on into something worth standing on. The harbor table was open. Maya Bennett was running it. And for the first time in her life, the outside world finally matched what she had always known about the inside of herself. That was not luck. That was not rescue. That was not the gift of a powerful man who had happened to notice her. That was the result of a woman who had picked up a coffee pot and refused to flinch, and had never, not once, through everything that followed, put it down.